Hi, I'm Mike Jeffries, and you're listening to the RoboCast.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sam Elliott64, and welcome back finally to the RoboCast. I'm joined alongside Jevon once again. How you doing, my
Hello.
man? Are you good?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you.
Good stuff.
Ready to do more of this. It's been a while, and
We're a bit rusty.
need some WD-40 on the old recording hinges, but otherwise fine.
100%. And as normally, we'd be joined by Steve, but unfortunately, he's not available this afternoon, so we've been kindly subbed in Charlie from Good Robottal. Hello, Charlie.
Howdy, it's been a
Long time.
while.
It has been an awfully long time since you've come and joined us, isn't it, really? It's, I want to say, the 2018 season, maybe?
I think 19. I think I was on for like
One of the early ones in 19,
episodes for
possibly.
that, but that was ages ago.
Absolutely. And as you would have heard from the intro, Mike Jeffries from Bombshell. How are you, my friend?
I'm doing pretty well.
It's been a while since we've seen you on BattleBots itself. How are you enjoying the time away?
It's been good. I took some time off, been playing a lot more in the shop, doing all sorts of weird projects, built my own belt grinder. I was actually in the shop earlier today doing some cleanup and stuff, preparing to build a new forging cart, so that'll be a fun one.
Very nice. And of course, we're talking today about the 2016 BattleBot season. 5 years ago now, would you believe?
Oh, don't say things like that, Sam. No.
I know. I can't really believe it's been that long. Mike, what are your kind of lasting memories of the 2016 season? Because obviously you had quite a good run, if memory serves.
Yeah, it was a surprise for us. You know, as a team, we kind of went into that season hoping to go there, put on a good show, and maybe get a win. So, suffice to say, we did a bit better than that. But I kind of view 2016 as a turning point season for BattleBots in particular.
Sure.
Because that was the season Bronco showed up with two Broncos, and that was a lot of behind the scenes discussion and drama. And that was kind of the start of the current era of the sport where teams are showing up with two robots or three robots or all sorts of crazy variations and things.
if
if
you're the lucky team.
Yeah.
And I think that was the season where that change happened.
Yeah, it kind of went from being like the sport that we kind of remembered growing up and watching to kind of the very hyper professional kind of high end competition that it is today, I suppose, really, and kind of gone on that trajectory going upwards.
The weird thing with that, though, is that was also the last season where the teams actually got a build stipend. So the
Yeah.
professionalism has gone up, but the funding has gone down, which is odd. But I think part of that is the switch from ABC to Discovery also resulted in a lot more potential for sponsorship for the teams.
Sure.
So sponsorship's still not where I think it should be for the sport, but it's in a much better spot for the teams actually being able to create some level of sustainability outside of the show.
Yeah, I think you're right as well in the sense that because it was on ABC, it was a big cable. I'm not massively familiar with all the networks, but it's a fairly big network, isn't it, in terms of across the country compared to Discovery, particularly.
Yeah, it'd be kind of the UK equivalent of Channel 4 or something where it's one of the low number channels that everyone who has TV essentially has access to.
Sure.
It's not quite the BBC because it's, not publicly owned or any of that sort of stuff, but it's one of those channels where if someone has a TV and they've got cable, they have it.
Sure. Oh, fair enough. One thing I think before we begin on the actual season itself, there was a very big rule change for the 2016 season from the 2015 season. It will get brought up a few times throughout, I'm sure, because of various fights going certain ways. The active weapon rule, not the powered weapon rule, or is it the primary weapon rule?
Primary weapon.
That's the one. Primary
it was
weapon.
Changed to active weapon in 2018.
Correct.
So yeah, primary weapon rule in 2016, and oh boy, did that cause controversy.
Yeah.
Yep.
It sure did.
It's a tough one, and I do not envy the judges having to deal with some of the nuance around specific wording and the criteria they've got to use, because inevitably the people on the internet are going to read the rules and interpret it their own way.
Yeah.
And there's going to be, behind the scenes meetings and production discussions and all that sort of stuff where the judges get a very specific interpretation of how they're supposed to handle the rules. And then Twitter howls at them.
Yeah.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And Facebook and Reddit and all the rest of the social medias, it's as Charlie quite rightly demonstrated there, a big explosion.
Yeah.
I suppose we should kick off with the very first episode of the season, which isn't episode 1.
Before we do, I do
Gentlemen.
just want to say that 2016 BattleBots, for me, has some of the best moments in robot combat history in it. There are moves in this series of robot combat that have never been replicated since, and we've never seen before. Things like, which I'm sure we'll get to, but the drone takedown, the head dance to victory. It's just a phenomenal series of moments for me. Even
Saw
though
meeting Lipo.
well, there is that as well. Yes, yeah, that was another good moment, and one that we haven't seen again quite to that extent. Anyway, yeah, lots of excellent moments in 2016 BattleBots. I like it a lot.
I think it was kind of that big shot in the arm. Like, I remember watching it at the time and being like, obviously Robot Wars had just come back in the UK as well at the same time, and you compare the two, it's like, these are worlds apart.
Yeah, 2015 BattleBots was good, but it was kind of very... This is sort of what's happened, whereas 2016 you could get more into the action, I felt. It was... Yeah, it was strange.
I think that's also due to the fact that 2015, because no one really... Not that no one knew that it was coming, but like it was a very quick turnaround, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
The teams that did it only had a couple of months from, hey, this is happening, to we're filming.
Yeah.
Sure. Whereas,
So you got a lot more
obviously,
rushed builds, and you've got a lot of things where it's like, all right, we're not really sure what to actually expect when we get there. And then 2016, you've got a lot more teams that are at least sort of grasping what needs to happen, and you've got now returning teams. And, reasonably decent timelines, a little bit more time for the builds, which is always helpful. And I think that made a big difference.
It's worth saying 2016 features the birth of a lot of the robots that are up there now. You got your rotators, your blacksmiths, your saw blazes. They all started here. I think Bombshell.
Well, and that was the beginning of the current Bite Force.
It is, yeah. And it was not plain sailing for them in this timeline.
Really
Who'd have thought?
It's weird, like going back in hindsight and like seeing the robots that struggled or that didn't get as far, like Sawblaze or Splatters that become Whiplash, and then just see their meteoric rise that they're at now is honestly just really flooring. But then there's also like kind of like the robots this season that showed a lot of potential that we haven't heard anything from in ages, like Stinger and Razorback, where they were really starting to get their footing, and then radio silence.
Yeah. For a year.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Pretty crazy. Well, as I kind of alluded to, let's start with the very first episode, which is the pilot. There was a pilot episode.
0.
How about that? There were 4 three-way melees to qualify for the main competition. I'd like to think that if Son of Y actually did lose against Ultraviolent and the Creepy Crawlies, I'd like to think it would still have gone through anyway, but
yeah,
that's neither here nor there.
That was a fight that very much felt like it was scheduled that way to make sure there was a very good destructive fight in the pilot.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, let's start with that fight anyway, shall we? Because I think that is the first fight of the episode. And on my notes, I've for the first time ever, ladies and gentlemen, I've made a shed load of notes. For Creepy Crawlies, I've just put oof. Because God bless the Creepy Crawlies.
I mean, it's strange to think, and I completely forgot that they were even at BattleBots in 2016, because obviously the same team then brought Orte to Robot Wars that year, and then after that, 2017, they brought in
Four Horsemen. And Four Horsemen.
4 Horsemen, yeah. So it's really a something they were sticking with, and from a sending it to America point of view, I can understand that sending a load of smaller robots is probably going to be easier than sending a big one or a couple of big ones. Probably not the robot that I'd have thought they'd have taken, but maybe they hadn't thought about the spinners at this point. But they are all the little pincery robots, aren't they? In the Creepy Crawlies. And this is something that Team Big Bro kind of just stuck with throughout modern robot combat. I mean, as you said, 4 Horsemen, they even went to China with the Grubs and did the same thing. It's it seems to be their thing at the minute.
I mean, they're enjoying it. That's all that matters, really, I suppose. And everyone of the team gets to drive one of the robots,
Exactly.
which is great.
Yeah, everyone's involved.
And one thing I think about with multi-bots, and there's other types of bots where this is the same sort of deal, is if you're building these, you're not building it because you look at this and go, this is the most effective way to win the tournament. You're building it because it's what you want to do to put on the kind of show you want to put on.
Mm-hmm.
Because doing a multi-bot or a modular robot, you're making design sacrifices to get that appearance and that presentation.
Mm.
And you know that going in. So even if I'm sure they were well aware what kind of stuff they'd be facing, I doubt they knew they'd be going up against Sunwayachi in the first fight, but
It's a bit
they knew they were going in at a
really.
disadvantage to begin with.
No, you're right. It's one of those unfortunate things, but I suppose you kind of turn up to a competition like that and you kind of think, well, if the worst happens, then the worst happens, doesn't it? What a great way to go.
I suppose if we look at 2015 and you get a robot like Chronic, who came over from the UK and didn't get to fight other than in, I believe, a whiteboard, I think, maybe. A UK team coming across to the US and getting a fight in BattleBots is better than that, basically. And getting to fight a legend like Sao is high caliber indeed.
Mm-hmm.
And I also say too, I know we talk about creepy crawlies and Sonowayachi, but I really feel like Ultraviolent deserved better because it was such a cool design, and really in a modern ethos, it could have been this outrun version of Gruff, this 80s synthwave version of this tanky robot.
Yeah.
And instead, it's been basically, at least for more casual people, seen as a bit of a joke that got sacrificed to Sonowayachi and Hypershock.
It's a shame, but again, at the same time, this is me sat in my chair kind of looking at this, but you have to think as well, Gruff probably could take a hit or two from Sonowayachi. Ultraviolet kind of disintegrated upon contact, didn't it? Bless it. But
yeah, it was
a
very
new team,
nice
I think.
robot.
It was very cool.
Yeah.
It was very cool. I don't know how much more we want to talk about the pilot in terms of fights, because that was pretty much the standout.
I want to highlight
who else
just
is there?
very briefly who else was there, because there's
Sure.
a lot of big names these days. So you've got Bad Kitty, who has recently become Mad Catter.
Mm-hmm.
Scorpios started out here.
Scorpios got stuck.
I
under
feel
the...
so bad for them. Getting stuck under the screw, and they were
They're
told
just
to
soaring
turn off
into it.
the weapon
Soaring
because
into
they
it.
were cutting through the screw to the
going.
point where it was going to do permanent damage to the arena.
Oh god! I mean, who would have thought that a robot that got stuck under the screws would go on to beat Tombstone a few years later?
Yep.
Or even Ice Wave one season later.
I know it's crazy. God bless that team, and they're wonderful. Or both versions of that team as well.
Yeah. You got Mohawk here. You've got Invader, who is definitely not Gigabyte.
Totally
No. Never stop spinning.
Yeah, so kind of an interesting little tidbit. That fight, I think Invader did the most dollar damage of any robot in the sport in that one fight.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just to the production budget
Yeah,
because it took 40 minutes to spin down.
Spin.
And it's something like $1,000 a minute for filming.
Crikey.
I know this past season, Captain Shredderator had something else happen, where it wouldn't stop spinning.
Yeah, I think they were around about the same
Similar
amount of
deal
time,
where
50
if a
minutes.
bot like that gets stuck on and they have to just wait, you're just sitting there watching piles of money lit ablaze and the smoke's pouring out of the arena.
Wouldn't
Reminds
it
me-
be helpful if you had some sort of house robot to stop them?
It reminds me of that GIF, the Fairly Odd Parents GIF where they're just shoveling money into the generator.
That's exactly what happens
literally
when a
what it
robot
is.
gets stuck on.
Oh dear.
And then you got Gemini and Blacksmith and Basilisk, who we saw again in 2018. But Blacksmith's starts were rocky in these.
It caught
fights.
fire, didn't it? It caught fire.
It caught fire and lost its hammer. It just sort of fell off.
But it did a good job.
Yeah, it won.
It bossed the fight. It bossed the fight.
Yeah.
Well, that was the pilot. Now, episode 1, if I remember correctly, was meant to be, I can't remember if it was meant to be 2 episodes, but it became 1. It was basically a 2-hour premiere, wasn't it? If I remember correctly,
Yeah.
It was
That sounds right.
Once upon a time.
I think it was filmed, so it would be an hour episode for each of them, and then they decided to do the big premiere episode at some point between when filming happened and airing.
Yeah.
Especially considering, like, in between the pilot and the first episode, if I remember correctly, it was like a month or 2 months. It was like this really long period in between them.
So I didn't even know there was a pilot episode until like the last couple of years. Like it was like it wasn't widely known, was it?
They did broadcast it on UK TV back in the time. It was on 5 Spike. They got the rights to BattleBots for ABC seasons 1 and 2. And yeah, I remember because we used to watch 5 Spike quite a lot. I think the X-Files were on it or something. And we saw that BattleBots was advertised. And I was like, oh great, it's back. And it was this episode 0. And I was like, this is strange. And episode 1 happened and it was fine.
Yes. Well, we'll start with the first fight at least, because it was Blacksmith again.
Yeah.
And fighting the six-wheeled Bronco.
Best wheel Bronco.
Yes, it's so good.
Just have
more wheels makes things better, man. I'm sorry, it just does.
You know, in terms of defending yourself against having your drive removed, surely 6 wheels is better than weird ribs.
It's difficult. Like, surely preventing any wheels from going is better than having 2 lopped off and you're still okay, sort of thing.
I mean, I think the best way to avoid getting your drive disabled is to be able to turn in less than the length of a Cadillac.
Yeah, that is very true.
No, you're right. It's Bronco. It turns like a barge, doesn't it? It's not the biggest, and it's not the most graceful of machines, let's say. They also had these huge kind of top armor bits for the hammer of Blacksmith, which again, a setup which worked.
Yeah. That came back later on, I believe.
Yeah, I think they used them against possibly huge. I'm pretty sure Saw Blaze.
Yeah.
They've used them against a few different bots over the years.
Yeah.
It's one of the more effective alternate setups, I think.
I do feel a little bad for the Bronco guys, just because the switch to nitrogen for BattleBots meant they had to have these gigantic air tanks in the robot.
Yeah.
And that drove so many of the dimensions of the thing, which led to them being that kind of awkwardly long, skinny profile. And I think if they didn't have to account for those giant tanks, they would have potentially had a design that stood up a bit longer.
Mm.
No, I think you're right. The thing is, for the first couple of seasons at least, they were still so effective as well. Like, they managed to make the most of a bad situation in terms of what they had given to them. Basically, it was very impressive, the fact that they were able to keep going as well.
Yeah,
as
they did a fantastic job with the bot. I think it was one of those things where having to make that design compromise eventually let other people catch up with, in case of like Hydra, surpass them as the top flipper in the sport.
Correct.
It's going to be interesting to see how, if they are planning on redesigning, because I think at the end of Bounty Hunters, they were saying that they're going to completely go back to the drawing board. So if it shows up for a potential 2021 season, how that's going to fare, not only as a new design, but also against Hydra probably returning, any of the Brit flippers coming over, and then Blip, the new flipper from the Tantrum team.
Yeah, bringing a whole new style of flipper in, the flywheel powered.
It's exciting. It's interesting to see how sort of the old guard can kind of adapt and see, how can they kind of evolve, sort of thing, and go with the sport, the way the sport's going.
Yeah.
As for Blacksmith, I mean, the hammer came off again, but Owl did control it very well. Like, it kept for a long time with getting under Bronco and giving them problems, but eventually, like, yeah, as I say, as soon as you're up in the air once, I suppose they know what to do to keep you there, and
yeah,
Bronco deservedly winning. I will skip over the Death Roll Shredderator fight, but I will say Death Roll's come an awful long way since 2016 as well, hasn't it?
There's a lovely art bot in this fight, and Shredderator really gets a win.
It does.
Things change.
Yeah. Oh dear.
It went back for hibernation for a little bit, and when it came back out of hibernation, it was pissed.
Yeah.
Crocodile Scran America.
Who would have thought? I will talk about the next fight though. Beta and Lucky.
This is a big one
Beta,
on YouTube. This is all over the place on YouTube, and it's always recommended to me. Every now and again, it just pops up again, and I was like, "Yeah, I'll watch that again." Sure, it's just a nice fight, isn't it?
Both robots did a great job, and the loser Lucky in this case deserved its wild card, because it was, it gave as good as it got, and obviously
Yeah.
driven by the almighty Gary Jin, who went on to do his own thing with free shipping in BattleBots. It's just it was a bit of a super team, that lucky team, because you had Rob as well, Rob Massick.
Well, and they've done that a couple times
Yeah.
with the lucky team, where it seems, I'm not sure behind the scenes how it goes together, but it sort of looks like the team is made up of all of the prominent builders that aren't already on another team any given season.
Right.
It's kind of like the All Stars team, where you just put them all together and see what they can do. And in this case, they can drive Lucky really, really well.
Like, you ever like see like an album with, like, a producer who gets like a bunch of like other like prominent stars on that? Mark Demers, like the captain of Lucky, is basically the Robot Combat equivalent of that. Just getting any who's onto the team
as a feature. Yeah, I completely get you. This, I think this is also this is my favorite version of beta. Nothing against,
of course.
Nothing against what they've got on to do with the new season, but this is just beta to me. This is the one, and it even fell off the trolley to begin with.
The
Not
thing
the best
with
start.
that version of beta, I think, is it's the best suited to the kind of fights you want at BattleBots. Like the one from the most recent season, it needs to be methodical and really line up those shots to get the best out of its weapon, and that isn't what BattleBots is going for. That's not really the way the fights are structured. It's not even really the way the arena's laid out. And I think Season 2 version of beta, where it could be very aggressive with its weapon, is the best version of beta for BattleBots. Not necessarily the best beta, but the best for the show.
It's really odd to see that in this season of BattleBots that we get a completely different John Reed to we did on the first season of Robot Wars. Where you're no longer waiting for those hits and getting some good ones. It's just all-out aggression.
Send it.
Of course, beta was partly Team Robo Challenge that year as well, and they were involved with without the Quantum team. They were split up, I believe. There was another member on a different team. I can't remember where.
Warhead, I think.
That was it. But yeah, it's really cool to see beta just keep on smashing.
Absolutely.
And also really good to see the bantering as well between John and Rob. John and the Lucky team.
No, it was good. It was just an enjoyable fight to watch, really. Like, if you haven't seen it out there, if you're a newer fan of BattleBots, go and watch it, because it's out there on YouTube. It's well worth a look. Also well worth a look is Minotaur and Photon Storm.
Tiberius 4.
I was going to say, I have written in my notes Tiberius 4. You'd be proud. Apparently, it doesn't look too bad, because it's only the one big hit at the end that Photon Storm takes, and it's done. Yeah. Apparently, internally, it was an absolute mess. I think we spoke to Andrew Marchant not too long ago, and he kind of said, look, that robot afterwards was cooked. It was done.
I'm not sure exactly what the decision process was, but after that fight, it seemed like they basically looked at the robot and decided it was such a write-off that they went to an amusement park instead of sticking around to try to repair it.
There you go.
Go to Six Flags. It was just much easier.
Going to Anaheim for Disneyland.
I mean, Tiberius 4, I can't remember when it first started coming, because 3 was in Series 7.
Yeah, Tiberius 4 was a live scene robot.
Yeah.
Built for the UK live scene where
with
they
no
weren't fighting anything, nearly as bad as this.
It is weird, like, seeing how, because I think, Photon Storm was, like, one of the only, like, true crushers in this season, if I remember correctly, along with Mohawk. It's weird to see, like, how quickly the crusher meta has even evolved, even just, like, in modern day, where you have Kraken and Quantum that are actually doing pretty well.
Yeah, and they're pushing the boats out for technology, and Petunia as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, big up Petunia.
Yeah, absolutely. Minotaur, bit of a slow start, though. I think they were very fortunate that claw didn't do more damage to the wheel, because that could have been a massive upset.
I think they were worried. They were genuinely worried that it was going to go through and hit something, and that would be them. But luckily it was well armoured, and Photon Storm is a crusher that used to fight tinfoil in the UK.
Essentially, yeah.
It definitely helped announce Minotaur as, like, they're here and they're not playing around.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I do wonder how much a slow start from Minotaur could be essentially just getting used to the new combat environment.
Yeah.
Because, like, they've been in the US a bunch at a ton of events and just rocked the place.
Yeah.
But it is a very different experience stepping up to the battle box with all of the lights and all of the pomp and stuff going on. And it's a very different sort of experience, and it's really easy to let that get into your head.
I
No,
will also
you're
say
right.
that this version of Minotaur is my favourite by far. Even though 2018 went further, 2019 pushed the boat out with different weapon designs and everything, this is my favourite because it was new on the scene and there wasn't
The
anything
noise
quite
as well.
like it. Yeah,
Oh, mwah.
It's just- it was
I missed
very
it last
nice.
season. I missed it last season. I sincerely hope that we do get to see them again in 2021, but we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah,
They do have a GoFundMe.
They do.
And did recently announce that Big Blue Saw is a sponsor of theirs. So I'm
that's a
assuming
good
if the
sign.
sponsorship's happening, that's probably a good sign that things are moving in the right direction at least.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The next fight was Disco Inferno, or sorry, the Disco Inferno, sorry, and Chomp.
We don't want to talk about this one, do we?
So this is the first instance of the primary. No,
Yeah.
yeah, the primary. It is
Primary
weapon
rule.
rule.
The primary weapon of Disco Inferno is the disc. The primary weapon of Chomp is the hammer.
Lo and behold, the disc stopped after one hit. The hammer kept going, and by the rules, Chomp wins. It's
Yeah.
you know, as frustrating as it may be for the audience seeing Disco Inferno control the fight, its weapon didn't work, so you have to give it to Chomp.
Yeah,
Yeah, the
realistically
judging criteria
speaking.
that season was extremely heavily biased towards weapon use, and in a way where if you lost your weapon, you were in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
I would like to imagine a scenario like after this fight, Jason Barnes just said, "Screw this, I'll do your job better."
Yeah.
And he has done ever since.
Yeah. It is worth saying that their secondary weapon is actually just their street mech. I don't know if it was
worked as
intended.
lifter, though.
Yeah, I don't know if it was intended to be
I
used like
do
that,
wonder
but
how much of the flips it got on Chomp were just physics and Chomp having an argument versus
Yeah.
Disco Inferno lifting Chomp.
It's an interesting theory, is it? Because Chomp didn't like staying upright, did it? Bless it. that version, the new one does. Obviously, it's very low center of gravity on the new one. Yeah, he's thick. And that's actually the last time, at least to date, that Team Inferno have actually fought in a main competition, which is
that said, they have just built
Yeah.
a new Doctor Inferno Junior, which is adorable, and protect him.
please
And
do.
someone will find a way to complain that it's a D2 kit.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
It's the best. It's the most interesting D2 kit I've ever seen. Like there's like you can put a weapon on a D2 and it's like, okay, cool. You put an overhead on it or whatever. But like it's just stupid. It can't run upside down. It makes it the best.
It looks fantastic.
It
Yeah.
really does. It really does. Well, the next fight, Mike, I'm going to turn to you because it was your first fight, Bombshell and Complete Control. Another judge these days in Derek. How did you feel going into fighting this fight? Because it was a bit. It went one way very quickly, didn't it?
This was a weird fight. So, to start off with, we were pitted immediately next to Complete Control. And we found out about the fight, I want to say a day and a half or so before the match was scheduled to happen. So, day one, we find out about it some point during the day. We were scheduled day two in the evening to fight. So, as a team, what we did is we kept switching which weapon we had installed and we were working on immediately in front of them.
Nice.
So we'd switch a module, they'd start working on adaptations for that module. Then we'd switch the module an hour or two later, and they'd start working on that change. And we just kept doing this over and over and over again. And then at some point in this process, we have this thought of we should do a callback to season 1 when they had the gift wrapped net for Ghost Raptor.
Mhm.
So we have one of the people on the team go out and get an empty cardboard box and gift wrap it. And we said it was a birthday present for Randy on the team's son, who was out for his birthday.
Oh.
So they buy that. But all of this is going on for about a day and a half. They're just getting completely exhausted. We finally get loaded up and roll over for the fight with the gift wrapped box stuck to the axe. So now they know something's going on. But at some point during all of this process, when they were redoing the plumbing on their flamethrower, either they nicked a line or they left one unhooked, because when they got everything set up right before we were about to go into the arena, final fight of the day, they vented their entire propane tank backstage.
No.
So production had to shut down for the night pretty much
no.
immediately because the entire backstage area was now flammable.
Right. Fair enough then in that case.
So everything got cleared out. We had to reset, redo everything the next morning, and finally actually got in and fought. And the initial bit of the fight I thought was pretty fun. Nice little bit of back and forth, smacking each other. I've actually got one of the armor panels they built for us downstairs with a couple nice dents in it and a whole lot of melted urethane, which is the other part of the fight, where they finally get this perfect grab on us
Yeah.
and pick us up right above them and fire that flamethrower off.
It's a beautiful
And
move.
just, it looks like we're bleeding on them because we've got this giant urethane bumper for the axe to bounce off of if we miss.
It just melted away.
It just
That's
melts over
what-
everything. There's this sticky coating of urethane everywhere.
I must say, when I first watched this fight in my youth, I thought,
In your youth, it was five
Yeah,
years
5
ago,
years ago.
Jevon.
hey, come on, I can dream.
Glad.
I thought, what on earth is burning? Maybe it's their fuel. And then I learnt how robots work properly. And, yeah. But I have been wondering since what it was that melted.
Genuinely, the entirety of our repairs from that fight was replacing about $1 in wire.
That's crazy.
But it was a memorable moment. I thought it was a pretty good fight in general.
Mm.
I mean, to be fair as well, like, if you look back at that now, of course, like, we've never really seen a flamethrower do that level of damage ever again. It was a very.
Yeah.
I think it was the fact that you were just the right size to fit in their grabber.
Yeah, it was this perfect alignment of circumstances. And, like, that's the fight where we found out that trying to fly a drone in the BattleBots is like trying to fly a drone in a hurricane because they've
Yeah.
got these gigantic exhaust fans. So there's basically random airflow in all sorts of directions, which means it's almost impossible to fly in a way that looks even sort of controlled. But having lost the fight, I'm thrilled everything went the way it did, because looking back at the season, our next fight, we had our weapon die on the first hit. And if we'd had that happen in the complete control fight, I don't think we'd have gotten the wild card.
Well, did you think you were going to get the wild card anyway? Because obviously, spoiler alert, you did.
Yeah.
Did you think you'd done enough in that fight to warrant a wild card?
So my strategy going into that fight was, we're a modular robot, and the show wants to see us use more than one weapon module, so if we put on a good fight, they'll probably bring us back no matter what happens.
Yeah.
It worked.
Yeah, it worked out. I think if we'd been able to use the lifter module, we might have won the fight, because I think that would have been the better one to fight complete control with. But we were having issues with the drivetrain on it, and it just wasn't going to actually lift a heavyweight, so we kind of put it to the side and left it there.
It's such a shame because I really like the look of the lifter module, and it's the kind of lifter module that we've seen recently with things like Big Dill and those styles of robot, where it's very much sort of prongs get in there, lift. It looks gorgeous. It's
The serrated prongs with the hooks over the top has become a very consistent style of lifter.
Yeah, it's almost a new meta coming in. There's several robots, and we got to see one over the weekend or last weekend, Vanguard, which is doing the same thing over here in the UK, which is exciting because I do love it as a concept of lift.
Yeah, I do sort of love that particular style of fork has been now referred to by a bunch of different people as Nix forks, which is the 30-pound robot I kind of brought them to prominence with back in the day. And, well, back in the day's not right, because I ran it as recently as like 2018, so...
It feels like a lifetime ago at this point, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, last year was 5 years.
Kind of a cool little bit of tie-in there is I decided to take a long break, sold Nix to the builder of Big Dill.
Ah.
So, yeah, Emmanuel's kind of taken a look at that 30-pounder, integrated some of the stuff that worked well in that into his heavyweight, and is now building what I think is a really cool-looking lifting bot.
Mm-hmm.
It looks fantastic, the new version of Big Deal, doesn't it?
Yeah, the cabs you showed off that was extremely fantastic.
Yeah.
No, you're not wrong. We'll move on to the last fight of the first episode, which was a Walden Overlord and Warhead, which was probably a little bit of an exhibition, but it was nice. It was very weird to see two prominent Brit teams fighting each other, or at least two Brit captains. Rob Knight from Mortis fame from Once Upon a Time in the UK, which when I saw him, I was like, hang on, that's Rob Knight. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, where's he been?
And once again, in elaborate...
Oh, in some kind of funky gear. Yeah, of course. Because why not, right? Because why wouldn't they?
Like something funny I actually I've thought about is I think Razor and Mortis were like the team the teams that fought each other twice, but it's been in the US, at least like as far as like big events. They never fought each other on Robot Wars, but they did like in like Long Beach 99 and then BattleBots 2016.
Yeah.
Pretty weird, isn't it? Like you fly all that way just to fight your mates who you've been fighting with for the last few years anyway.
The memory that stands out for me with a Walden Overlord in particular was in their pits. They had essentially a hot plate set up and this low temperature melt plastic that they were using for a bunch of the structure of the robot to basically help tie everything together and put some sort of shape to it. So there's just this perpetual smell of essentially like a paraffin wax sort of smell emanating from that pit area.
Nice.
As they're just warming up and reshaping this plastic for days.
Oh, dearie me. I remember him saying when we spoke to him for the Mortis interview last year, didn't we, Jevon?
Yeah.
And he kind of said like it was just a lot of stress getting that robot together. Quite, as you can see, why? Because it's just so complicated.
One arm was dead throughout the fight. It died when they were loading it into the box, and I think it was Rob's arm actually, the one that he was controlling at least. They'd all got quite ill, as well as I recall him saying. Everything didn't quite come together for Walden Overlord, but it was a good-looking robot that did something interesting.
Yeah, there was something nasty running through the pits that season. I don't know who brought it. I know at least one prominent builder was hospitalized. It was so bad.
Oh dear.
Wow.
Yeah, something really nasty ran through the pits that year.
I feel like at least once a season, like a builder or builders get sick, because I know like there's that whole thing. Then I don't know which year was like the taco truck incident, if I remember that correctly. I know Jack Tweedy got really sick.
Yeah, Tweedy
he got
was
food
poorly.
poisoning in 2018.
Yeah.
He got food poisoning, and then he was also Tweedy welding in the sun for like an entire day.
He didn't drink enough water.
I think he got heat stroke or something like that.
Yeah.
It was a rough situation for him because I think his teammate had to leave, so he was basically having to manage a heavyweight on his own.
Who else but Tweedy?
pretty much. God bless him. We love Tweedy. Episode 2 starts off with a bit of a one and done really with Mobius and Brutus. The only thing I've got written down as notes is guns.
Bang bang.
Yeah. So in the pits, we had little TVs set up so the builders could watch the fights as they're happening. The moment of confusion where everyone thought that somehow the Brutus team had snuck smoke grenades into their paintball guns, because nobody realized that was the batteries that had went up.
Mm-hmm.
So we thought they just snuck smoke grenades into the arena.
So I'm confused in this fight because for the longest time I was under the impression that they were real guns. Obviously not, because they don't do that. But there is a moment where it shoots Mobius in the face, and Mobius just then
wobbles.
Yeah.
Wobbles, yeah.
So my best understanding of what actually went down there, so they were using essentially like paintball guns that looked sort of like real guns that had been modified for their setup.
Yeah.
And coincidentally, when they shot Mobius's shell, the improvised battery mounts that they made, because the original stuff had gotten lost in shipping, broke. And it basically pulled the lipos out through the shell and launched them across the arena.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not clean at all.
It was extremely unfortunate.
Yeah.
I love lipo smoke in the morning.
Yeah.
Don't breathe this.
Absolutely not.
It's teasing a return though, so
Seemingly so. There's been some action on. They've made an Instagram, haven't they? And they've been.
Oh wait, no. I think it actually came out. Sorry, I think it actually came out that they weren't accepted or they had to pull out again.
but they're active. They're still doing
which is nice.
Good.
Yeah, I say that. I want to say that.
I'm not going to go into too much detail because I actually have seen everything,
Oh.
but there are lots of good bits of activity. But this is a really tough season to get into coming up, season 6, for a multitude of reasons, not the least of which being all of the international teams that couldn't show up last season that are now trying to come this season, along with other teams in the US that had to drop out due to COVID reasons.
Yeah.
All competing for spots that other teams got into because they were able to make it. So you've got tons and tons of heartbreak as far as really good bots not making the cut.
Yeah. I mean, anybody who's anybody in the UK. Flamingo. Anybody who's anybody in the UK and has built a heavyweight applied for this season, basically. And it's been brutal seeing some of the people not get in.
It does mean though that you're going to look at the season and think, God, the quality is going to be so high, like because the level of competition is so high. You're like, of course, you're going to cherry pick. Okay, we'll have you, and you. Like the standard of machine, in theory, should be spectacular, which I'm sure it will be.
Yeah.
I do want to talk about
the teams I feel really bad for in that respect. Is inevitably there's going to be some teams that drop out because that happens every season. Some people just end up not being able to make it. And the teams that are then able to throw something together at the last minute and turn up, I really hope they don't catch crap because they're lower quality than the robots that had months and months of prep time.
Yeah.
Because inevitably someone's going to go, well, why did they get in instead of this team? Because they turned around a robot in a month when somebody else dropped out at the last second.
That happened quite a lot last season. Like there were certain teams that got quite a lot of flack, which completely undeservedly, because obviously they turned up in a season where it was the middle of a pandemic. It was still, everything was still kind of very much closed. Like it was filmed in October, so it was kind of still pretty dicey at that point. You know, you got to think teams were turning up with the machine. I would say risking their lives probably the wrong way of putting it, but like they were putting themselves at risk for entertainment purposes, you know?
Yeah. Well, and a lot of the teams that underperformed are also teams that basically started building because they were told, we need you to come in August for an October event. And they're going against teams that were building for originally a timeline that would have had them shipping in April. So you've got a lot of bots that have months and months of extra build time against some bots that had a month of build time. In the case of Axolotl, as far as I know, they basically built that robot in a month.
Yeah, that's what I've heard as well.
Yeah.
People forget Rusty was originally a reserve.
The goat himself. Well, let's talk about another fight that from this episode in particular that I do want to talk about is Son of Watch Ghost Raptor. The only thing I want to talk about that is spin him up, take him down from Chuck, and he tried to spin up. He
spun it up, and then he took himself down.
He really did.
It's unfortunate, really unfortunate.
No mercy though, was there?
The fact that wheel pod, or the wheel guard even, just went, I'm not going to have you spinning anymore. It was such a shame, and you know, it happens. But yeah, then Sal coming in and doing a nasty
playing some golf.
Yeah,
didn't exactly help it, did it? Really, it's a shame. But again, one of those examples where you kind of think, you look at sort of where actually you just like the level of destruction at the time we'd only really seen from Tombstone, really, and seeing something, you know, on a par with it was very spectacular.
Especially as Ghost Raptor had done so well in 2015, not with the spinner, obviously, that had broken and fixed a lot of times, but you know, they got through. I think they were semi-finalists in 2015. I want to say, to then go out against Sal in this stage was a shocker, really.
No, you're not wrong. Next fight was Yeti and Lockjaw.
Ooh, lovely fight, this one.
Really good fight. And again, another different variation of the Lockjaw weapon compared to the kind of the lifters that it had this previous season. It was a spring-powered flipper, which then became a jaw, ironically with the name. It was a really cool fight. Cool fight.
I think that might be my favorite version of Lockjaw. The whole spring flipper mechanism just was so cool to look at.
So it's a shame we didn't see it, you know, working as well as this for other fights in the season. I think they had another whiteboard later on or something like that.
They did get a wild card against Brutus.
Yeah.
I don't think... Was it aired? I don't think it was aired.
No, it wasn't. It was another example of like the primary weapon rule coming into effect, where like Lockjaw was like keeping them at bay with the plow, but because they really didn't use their flipper, the judges were like, "Well, Brutus spun up, so they win."
Yeah.
But
One
I
of those
will
things.
say too here, I love this version of Yeti so much.
Yeah.
I think
The
it's
simple Yeti.
as well. Like going from a reserve to basically bulldozing your way to the competition and nearly putting Tombstone on the ropes and potentially maybe even beating it, depending on a couple factors changing, is one of the greatest underdog stories I think I've ever seen in the sport.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Yeti that season put on an amazing performance. I really wish he'd gotten past Tombstone, because that would have been a really cool final for me on a personal level.
Hmm.
So back when I was getting started in the sport, Greg actually helped me build my first lightweight.
Oh.
And we're talking almost 2 decades ago now.
It would have been quite a nice story. That would have been
Yeah.
like you got to think maybe not for this season, but if it was like one of the Discovery seasons, they would have dug up some footage from somewhere of the two of you together or something, wouldn't they?
Yeah.
Surely.
Yeah. I think he had actually, by the end of the season, run out of spare wheels. I remember that being an issue, or was it motors or something like that? Something to do with his drivetrain, anyway.
He ran out of
I think it
something.
was the wheels, because he was having to get wheels off of the Bronco team. But little fun side note. So back in, I think, 2003, it was myself and Greg driving down to an event called Steel Conflict in Pomona, California. That's Los Angeles area. In his little GMC Jimmy SUV with all of his stuff, all of Inertia Lab stuff, and then all of James Arluck's stuff from the Rex team. The like 7-hour road trip down to the event with this thing loaded up full of robot parts. And I think about 2/3 of the back was just Inertia Lab stuff for T-.
Amazing. It's just yeah, I do miss Yeti as well. It's a robot that you kind of after this season, it never really stood out to me as like, oh my god, like it's Yeti. Like it never really, like I don't know what it is. It never really did it for me. But like its absence in 2020, and obviously going forward now as well, because it's not going to be coming back. Is definitely a robot that you appreciate. You look at it and you think, God, it could really give a good fight to anything, really, couldn't it? So it was.
There is Riptide.
There is, but it's not the same, Charlie.
But it's probably the best that we'll get, and it's Outrun themed, so everything's better with an 80s theme.
You're not wrong. The last fight of this episode was Witch Doctor and Rotator, and it wasn't really a fight. And
I was going to say, glad you brought that up. Let's move on.
Yeah,
I want to see a rematch of these two.
I would love to see a rematch.
Bit of a
Rotator
That would be a great rematch for this season.
Miami showdown between the two of them.
Yeah.
Of course, there was photos that were circulating of obviously Andrea's middleweight and Blue Flame Victor's middleweight as well. So again, there's no reason not to now. Like it's been, as we said, 5 years since these two fought last time, and Rotator really has come on quite a lot since.
It's a different robot now.
It's
Completely
a
different
beast.
robot.
Yeah.
Like even though I missed the double discs, and I know the fact that he's gotten it so destructive and so unbelievably reliable now is astonishing.
It's just quite the machine now.
Mm-hmm.
That pretty much sums up the qualifying rounds. Apart, but in terms of the ones that were red, at least there were a lot of cut fights. They're all available on YouTube if you haven't seen them already. There is one I do think we need to discuss, which is a big. Even still today, a little bit of a talking point. It's the fight between Razorback and Sawblaze. It has 3.5 million views on YouTube for an unaired fight, which is ridiculous. But if you see it, you'll understand why. This is the most obvious example, I think, of the primary weapon rule coming into effect in this season, I think. Like, there's a few others that come into, contention, but this is the one.
Being there, it was the fight that was the most talked about in reference to that particular rule. Because if you watch the fight, Jameson and Sawblaze really controlled the match outside of the fact that the weapon didn't really come into play.
Yeah.
It was a very one-sided affair, in part because Razorback just wasn't shaped to fight Sawblaze. Its giant pronged wedge front end gets under Razorback pretty consistently and makes it almost impossible for it to do anything unless Jameson drops his weapon into theirs.
I feel like 2016 was like, I actually have 2 points. I feel like 2016 was one of the last years where it didn't become quite as much of like the battle for the low ground. Considering you see like a lot of bots that don't really come in with as much of like, a flat prongs or forks that you see now versus with last season where the entire, especially like towards the later part of the bracket, was winning the ground game. And then two, I genuinely believe like just after this, especially in hindsight, seeing how Sawblaze just decimates so much now, I feel like something about this fight just made Jameson so angry and so determined that he just basically became a whole different beast to what we have today.
Yeah.
It does make you think, and like, we were saying kind of before we started recording this with yourself, Michael, like, if this fight was done today and it played out exactly the same way, it would go the other way because the criteria has evolved and the judges have kind of realized, okay, maybe this was a bit too far one way, maybe need to pull it back a bit, refine the rules a bit further, because obviously we saw that this season with Beta and Rotator. Like it was quite arguably the same fight but the other way round, and it went the other way.
Yeah, in the realm of a little bit of kind of behind the scenes stuff. So over the course of the last few months, I've had several extensive meetings with Trey and Greg at BattleBots, along with Peter Abramson, and I was heavily involved in the process of rewriting this season's judging criteria. So a lot of what you see that got released in the last month or so on the BattleBots website is the results of those meetings, where we really pushed at the criteria to make sure it was heavily favored towards using your weapon, but not specifically biasing the way it's scored towards spinners. Because that's the big concern, is if you make it too weapon dependent, then you're just making it that much easier for spinners to win.
Yeah.
So aggression and control both now are a lot more heavily tied into how you're using your weapon with the criteria, but it's also a lot harder than it used to be to get a 5-0 on damage.
It's as we said already, like the way that the rules are kind of being directed now, it's getting better. Like, okay, there was a few outliers in 2020, and as we saw, there was that huge meeting with the builders in the pits. We saw there was a bit of confusion, and I think it's just clarity. I think that's what needs to be, and consistency more than anything. I think
that's a tough thing.
Yeah, of course it is.
Especially with control and aggression, those are inherently subjective categories.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things we were trying to do with the rules update was take as much of the subjectivity out of that as we could. I mean, you can't get it all out of there because that's just the nature of trying to gauge aggression. It's subjective at its core. But with damage, we've actually got a lot more objectivity to how you score damage points now. And that's meant to be sort of the counterweight to putting so much more emphasis on weapon use in the other scoring categories.
Sure. Good stuff. I'm looking forward to seeing how the fruit of your labors. Really, hopefully,
there's even a little nice matrix of like, if you do this much damage and your opponent does this much damage, this is the score you get. So it should be a lot closer from judge to judge as far as at least the damage category is concerned.
Sure. It's just everything else. Let's talk about episode 3.
Yeah.
First fight was Yeti and Lucky. Again, another great fight with Yeti. The theme will continue.
There's a wonderful move in this fight where Yeti gets the prongs in, lifts them up, and just knocks the face off of Lucky. Just takes the flipper off completely. I think because the forks, they were stuck together at that point, just to be able to have that motion with the forks to get up and get on top and do that damage to Lucky. It was, yes, love it.
Mm-hmm. As the theme does continue with Yeti in great fights this season, because I think pretty much every Yeti fight was a certified
even through
banger.
multiple seasons. Yeti is one of those bots where I think Greg's hyper aggressive driving style means it's really likely that if Yeti's in a fight, it's going to be a fun fight.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Win or lose, you're going to enjoy watching it.
The only one that was ever, I would even say, relatively disappointing was one because of just a simple, like very small failure was in the Ice Wave fight, where it had a
Yeah.
great hit, and then just a 1 in a million thing happened that's really unlike Yeti, and that was it. But that really wasn't the fault of anybody, just more of just one of those weird instances.
Well, and that was the one fight where he went with a very defensive setup, so that tells you just all aggression all the time.
There you
That's
go.
what Yeti needs.
Full smash.
And also, I mean, even then, you still got the great "Don't be a dick" line. So it's fine. He's still a winner. Fight 2 was Bronco and Chromefly. Again, my notes. I've got Chromefly. Why? It was special, wasn't it, Chromefly?
There were some design decisions on that robot that I'm still not entirely sure what the plan was. So we were actually pitted between Complete Control on one side and Chromefly on the other. So I got a lot of time to look at Chromefly, and one of the things that was odd about it is they just mounted their spinning bars directly to their weapon motors.
Yeah.
And these were like $1,000 weapon motors, and it's just mounted right to the shaft, and it hurts to think about how much damage every hit would do.
Yeah.
The best part was about this fight is because Bronco just backs up the whole fight and just lets Chromefly eat itself basically. The smack off of Chromefly onto Bronco and the weapon shears off and goes straight through the body of Chromefly. It's like, oh my god. And then Chromefly gets spawned again and gets balanced perfectly on the rail. It's wonderful.
Yeah.
Little fun fact that I actually didn't realize till later afterwards. One of the main members of the Chromefly team, I think his name was Josh Coates, who was the captain of the Sidewinder team. So I don't know if the universe had something against him or what, but literally the only 2 times he's had air fights on BattleBots, his robot would just completely fall apart, like with Sidewinder versus Scorpios in 2019.
Yeah.
Dearie me. Good old Chromefly. Oh dear.
Another example of a drone that never returned as well.
Yeah, or a robot that never returned. I mean,
Well, that's also true.
yeah. I mean, I want to say good riddance. Is that too harsh?
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. You should apologise publicly.
I apologise, Chromefly, if you're watching. I'm so sorry.
I doubt they are the. Not. Yeah.
Let's move on before we get cancelled further. Fight 3 was a certified banger because it was Witch Doctor and Red Devil.
This is a fight where I feel everybody then started. Oh, I don't know. I'm in the camp that isn't the biggest fan of Red Devil. I know. Shoot me.
Sorry, can I just hang you up quickly? Sorry.
Hang on. Let me just. I publicly apologise for my. Yeah, and it stems from this fight. This fight is an excellent outing for Red Devil, but it's the only time it has done what it intended to do.
I mean, I think it's the only. I think I'll say it's the only time it's done what it intended to do. I guess in more of a spectacular fashion. Because
Yeah.
in 2018, it held
That's
its own
fair.
against Brutus and Sub-Zero pretty well, but it wasn't as flashy as this, and it wasn't as
No.
big of a deal as this was. I will say on the other end, I feel bad for the Witch Doctor team because I feel like this fight gave them a deficit of public opinion that it literally took them until basically midway through 2019 to get out of, where it was seen as kind of good, had a good fight against Tombstone, and then it was rated super high. But then after this, people were just saying it was terrible, were hating on it relentlessly. That lasted for years up until, like I said, the 2019 season in Remars, where it just absolutely obliterated the competition and finally made people realize, okay, this is legitimately a good robot. And even this year too, really the only thing that was against it was just
The weapon kept breaking.
the weapon broke, which that can happen to anybody. And then it was outclassed by Sawblades, which I mean,
Who isn't?
if you were going up against the robot that beat you last season, you would be extra determined to beat them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mike, you've been very quiet.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in this fight, I would say I was very much rooting for Red Devil because we had to fight the winner.
it's purely selfish reasons, but I respect it.
What I will say with Red Devil is it's a beautiful robot, and nobody involved in the creation of it is under the illusion that it's an optimal design to win a fighting robot TV show. It's an art bot that's competitive as opposed to purely a competitive design, because it is art.
Oh, it's cool. It is the most gorgeous thing to like. The whole middle actuating. Like, I don't know if the treads individually actuate as well, but
The two side treads were linked together.
Okay.
So it's kind of a long axle that rotated effectively.
It's beautiful, and like it just the way it grabbed Witch Doctor straight away, just absolutely knowed it straight away, and it was mwah, chef's kiss.
It's a real shame. Not Red Devil. Witch Doctor was only involved in 2 very short fights in the main season, at least. One where it won, one where it lost.
Yeah.
I do feel the issue with this version of Witch Doctor was that the Shreemech was very much.
It was underneath it, wasn't it? It got stuck underneath itself at one point.
Well, it just felt a bit like an afterthought. It was a bit of tubing that they'd put on a.
I suppose if that's all you need, then
yeah, but the looks. I mean, you look at this version and then you look at 2018 on looks wise. It's a big step in between, and yeah.
What could have been for Witch Doctor, but it was Red Devil's finest hour, and God bless them for it. They worked for it. That's
The
what I'm
best
sure.
they ever did.
Yeah, pretty much. Let's talk about the 4th fight from this episode, and what a fight! I think this fight is the BattleBots fight since the show came back.
I spoke at the start of moments of greatness in this season. I have shown this fight to so many people as this is Robot Combat. Look at this. It's just amazing. The amount of damage done to Blacksmith is phenomenal, jaw-dropping, and they get set on fire at the end of it. It's just, what on earth, Minotaur, good grief.
Yeah, more than any other one of their fights that's this season, this is the one that Minotaur, I think, established themselves in perpetuity in the sport.
Yeah.
As far as the TV show is concerned, at least. I mean, if you've been involved in live events in the US, you know them. But this is the one that I think made them on the show.
It was just a complete destruction of Blacksmith, and obviously, Blacksmith is a fairly hardy thing. Like, as we see, later seasons, it put more, kind of build up this reputation as like this, hard to kill machine, and obviously, quite rightly earned reputation as a hard to kill machine, because it is.
I mean, the only robot that I can remember that did this amount of damage to Blacksmith since then was 2019 Witch Doctor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's the only thing that comes close, really. And even Minotaur the next season just struggled to break it down, but this was just the performance, wasn't it? And like it was ripping off panels, it ripped off the whole front, it blew it up inside, the hammer came off. It was complete devastation.
I believe at the time of 2018, this was one of the most viewed BattleBots videos on YouTube.
I think it is. I'll look it up now.
It probably
not any
still
longer.
is.
Yeah,
it's probably still one of the top ones, though.
I think it was for ages, and then just randomly, I don't know, because of Reddit or whatever, Lucky versus Vita overtook it like back.
I will tell you that the Season 2 exhibition rumble between Scorpio's Death Roll and somebody else whose name has gone off the end of the page and I can't see them in the picture is currently sitting on 28 million views.
Bucktooth Burl, I think, was the other one.
Yeah, that sounds it. But that is the most viewed one.
I mean, Blacksmith Minotaur is still at 22 million, which is nothing to sneeze at.
Absolutely not. It's incredibly impressive.
Every now and then on the front page of Reddit, just in different like subs. So it's still getting traction.
Yeah.
It's I think this is also what kind of put BattleBots back on the map as well. Like this, like season 1, okay, yes, Tombstone destroying Counter Revolution is obviously very spectacular, but this was another level. Like, and
this was total
the noise as well that you get from Minotaur is kind of it's just another kind of piece of the puzzle, isn't it? Really, it's wonderful.
Wish you could have seen, like, at some point, Minotaur versus Ice Wave, just for that.
Book it, Greg. Come on, sort it out.
Just pass out earplugs to everybody.
Yep.
And say, you're gonna need it.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about the next episode. It starts off in equally spectacular fashion, because we start off with Warhead and Complete Control.
Oh, blimey, I love this fight.
You came over all British there, Jim.
I know, right? And rightly so for who won this match. Oh man, I love this fight so much. There's two amazing moments in this fight. The first is where Warhead's flamethrower is on, and they go over and hit the side of
The fire punch.
Yeah, basically they transfer the fire from one robot to the other. It's so bloody cool. And then of course the kicker, which is where they've done one massive hit, sent themselves flying, they're upside down. Neither robot is moving at this point. One of them needs to show motion. Otherwise it's going to be like a simultaneous knockout if that was a thing back then, I don't know.
I think you could have a double count out at that point, but it would end up just going to the judges at that point.
Yeah. And then the head dance. The spinner spins up, the body lifts up, and it dances directly towards Complete Control. Now, I don't know if they can aim that thing, or if that was just fate or what, but my god, what a move.
And it hits it as well, like, of course.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah.
Oh, man. There's never been another move like it in robot combat history, and I don't think there ever will. Nothing is as cool as a robot on its head spinning towards its opponent and hitting that opponent.
The only thing I can really compare it to, for me at least, like having watched a lot of Beetlebaits recently, is Rev 4 kind of just dancing around the pit. That's the only thing I could think that's very similar, because just not touching the floor. It's not really in control, but it looks like it is, and that's enough for me. So, yeah, Charlie, sorry, go on.
Sorry, I was gonna say it's definitely great to like have the Razor team have like one big moment in the 2010s, because I feel like, especially like between Warhead struggling in 2015 and then almost making the bracket in 2018 until their dome cracked.
We don't
and
talk
then
about
going
that.
to Robot Wars, first episode, Razor falls in the pit. They had a rough decade on TV, so it's great to see from the heights they had in the 2000s to at least have one big defining moment.
Yeah, absolutely. They could have retired at this point, really.
Just call it a
Well,
that fight.
Basically what Derek decided to do is he looked at that fight, he looked at the fight against us, and was like, the robot's done everything it can possibly do on the show. I'm going to retire.
Yeah.
So on his wall, isn't it, I think?
Yeah, well, most of it. Some of it's downstairs.
The bits that you've claimed.
Yeah.
It is a shame, because this is obviously the last time we see Complete Control ever, fighting at least. And this version just looked so cool.
Yeah, it was a beautiful iteration of the bot.
Yeah.
And, Complete Control's been one of my favorites, even going back to the Comedy Central era. I've still got a Season 4 Complete Control t-shirt.
It must have been quite a cool moment to fight someone who's had such prominence in the show back in the early days as well.
Yeah. And that for me, that was one of the cooler things with my experience doing BattleBots, is I fought so many people that I watched on the show when I was a kid. And some of the comments from them in relation to the fights has been, pretty important to me. Like talking to Ian Lewis, and, he gave me a signed Warhead poster that the whole team had signed. And the comment that stuck with me is, he said, if their aesthetic was industrial, Bombshell's the robot they'd have built.
Amazing. That is so cool.
So that's a very important thing to me.
Absolutely.
And, I talked to Andrew Merchant from Tornado, which was probably, again, with Complete Control and Razor, some of my favorite robots from the early TV era of robot combat. And he had nothing but compliments about the robot I had designed and built. And that was really amazing.
Sort of like hair standing on end sort of thing. It's amazing stuff. Yeah, wonderful. That's great stuff. Oh, I love that. I don't know how to move. Let's move on to, Ghost Raptor, Razorback. There was a suplex.
There was a suplex. I've just been watching it back because I forgot what happened in it. But it's a good control match from Razorback. Really good control match.
I didn't really think they had it in it. Yeah, I didn't really think they had it in them, but they really, Zach Beaver really controlled the fight so well, and Ghost Raptor couldn't self right.
And Zach's a fantastic builder, and I love his aesthetic. Like every robot he's built, at least that I can recall, looks cool. It looks like one of those things that pops into your head when you think fighting robot. Because he puts that little bit of extra effort in, and it's not a little bit of extra effort, really, to make sure the robots not only do what they're supposed to, but they look cool doing it.
Absolutely. It's Razorback's another one of those robots which I wish it would come back. Just like just to see how, just to see it again, really, because I feel like in this season had a good thing going, and they went away, and is what it is, I suppose, isn't it?
I mean, it's tough doing modular robots.
That's the thing.
It's tough, and I know from our experience, it essentially felt like we were building 3 heavyweights instead of 1, because we had to just build so much extra stuff, and then we had to have spares for all of that. So it's a sacrifice from a design perspective. It's a monetary sacrifice for sure, because you've got to buy so many extra things, and then you're going into the arena with a robot that inherently can't be optimized for the setup you're using, because it has to be able to change around for a bunch of stuff. So it's just a tough thing to do. And I've given Zach a ton of credit for doing as well as he did with that robot, because it's not only modular, it's not only effective, but it's also beautiful while it does it.
Absolutely. The next fight was Tombstone and Escape Velocity. I mean,
Crossflow versus Daedalus.
Honeycomb.
It wasn't really a fight, was it? Bless poor old Escape Velocity, entering at the highest level, and it really was the highest level at this point.
I mean, is this
was
a
an
1 versus
unfortunate
32 seed?
Yeah, I suppose it's what you kind of expect, but
Yeah.
At least won by having the coolest shirts that season.
They did.
They did too. And to be fair, that the honeycomb was a look. It did look like something that a team from NASA would build, but
it looked like a forbidden snack. Like I just want to eat it. I probably ended up in the hospital, but the sacrifices.
Well, Tombstone ate it for you. How about that?
Yeah.
And the last fight in this episode was Son of Waiachi and Poison Arrow.
A fight that would have no ramifications in a later series. None at all.
Nope, zero. What a hit from Poison Arrow. I mean,
did what it had to do.
That was a jaw-dropping hit.
Just the full send as well. Like it was like they fully got the drum revved up and bang, and that was good night.
Yeah.
Between this and then their rematch they had years later, Copperhead versus Son of Waiachi, both of them ended in just some of the best hits of the season. It's just that it happened to the opposite team.
Yeah.
Son of Waiachi getting launched in the air and then conking out, and then with Copperhead getting tossed halfway across the box and thrown out.
Yeah, it was. Both fights were spectacular between these teams. I do love. I can't remember the guy's name. It's the dad. I can't remember his name. Is it Terry?
Yeah, Terry Yort.
That's the guy. I did like his kind of confidence beforehand. Does it really matter what it is? And it's like, humble pie, my friend. Here you go. Oh dear. Before we move on to the next round of the competition, though, there is one round of 32, 16?
32, I think.
32.
32, I think.
There is one fight I do want to talk about before we move on, and that's Bombshell and Cobalt. Now,
this was a fun fight. So, for the Bombshell side of it, we went into the season thinking we need to design some sort of weapon that could stand a chance against a big horizontal spinner for obvious reasons. Tombstone nearly won the prior season, one of the favorites coming into this season. So we came up with this goofy adjustable height horizontal spinner contraption that looked like some sort of angry mule that was chewing on a lawnmower blade. And we weren't expecting to have to break it out for anyone but Tombstone going into the event, but then we get the wild card and we get drawn up against Cobalt. A little bit of a fun side story is I'm in the US, Moldy obviously in the UK, so he can't order stuff from McMaster-Carr directly. But I was willing to order it and ship it to him. And the torque clutch he used for the weapon chain on Cobalt is one of the parts I picked up and sent to him. So I'm now fighting against a robot that I've supplied parts for.
Espionage.
And prior to this fight going on, I believe he had a nice chat with Matt Maxim from the Stinger team about what kind of strategy he wanted to take going into the fight, and settled on the backing into us approach to try and destabilize us, which makes sense because nothing about our horizontal setup was remotely stable. The center of gravity was forward of our front axles.
Oh wow!
And that was after we melted lead hammers into the back of the robot. It was the most painfully awkward thing I have ever driven. and that's saying a lot because I built a one-wheel drive robot with a lawnmower blade as a weapon that could only drive forward when it was driving a straight line going backwards. But it just so happened that when he was backing into us, our bar was set to the right height that we just skim up his plow, and the bar would drop onto his top armor. Some of those hits were just taking chunks out of the wheels. Some of the other hits, I think, partially helped him win the next Robot Wars championship because we sheared all of the bolt heads off the top of the robot. And you'll notice Carbide goes from button head screws prior to that fight to all flatheads on the top for the season they won Robot Wars.
So are you claiming that one then?
I mean, I could probably get a lot of people riled up in the UK by saying Bombshell's clearly the proxy Robot Wars champion.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, I mean, it was, you know, if you look at Cobalt and Carbide, there's an awful lot of similarities. You know, at this point in time, obviously, maybe not the second version, but yeah, I mean, by all means, I would absolutely claim that because, I mean, at this point, Carbide had already come second in the first season, hadn't it? So.
Yeah.
Even then,
if it weren't for all of the licensing issues, that would have been an amazing thing to do, is take not Bombshell over to the UK for Robot Wars and see how it did. I think it would have probably been better suited to that environment.
Were you ever tempted?
I'd have loved to. I don't think there was a way to make that happen, in part because the funding for it was very different.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But I think that was a really fun fight. We actually had an onboard camera for that fight, and we were able to get the footage and post it on our team Facebook page and stuff. So all the footage came out of that fight, and it was really fun to see that.
Go and look at after this.
Jevon's got a load of homework to do.
See, what I'm like thinking of like this fight is what, like a year or two later, whenever in Series 10 of Robot Wars, when Carbide lost a bit of the wheel against Gabriel, I can just imagine like Dave and Sam just sitting in the booth having like war style flashbacks.
Yeah. Oh no,
not again.
I mean, that's why he was so distant afterwards. He was like, what?
One last note on that fight. So the reason I mentioned I supplied parts to Cobalt for that season is the final hit of that fight. All the screws had been popped off of one side of the top armor. So instead of hitting the armor, our bar just goes right in underneath it. Mm-hmm. And hit the torque clutch I mailed Dave.
Oh no.
Bending the shaft on the E-Tech.
Oh.
Which was
nasty
not good.
But you also lost.
Yeah.
You win some, you lose some.
A little bit of a side story too. The only reason we ended up fighting Cobalt is because of our complete control fight. So the Cobalt fight against Overhaul, which was in one of the elimination rounds, was immediately after the complete control fight with Bombshell. And in our drivetrain, we didn't bother actually using any of the set screws. It was all keyways and spacers and things like that. And one of the set screws fell out, dropped out of our drivetrain and landed on the floor of the BattleBots, did not get swept up between fights. And then it got sucked into Overhaul's drivetrain, locking up the side of the drive, which is why Cobalt was able to get a really clean hit on Overhaul and win that, and turned the fight in that moment.
Now what I'm thinking is, like, because Charles is now based out of Atlanta as well, it's like, how often does he remind you of that?
Not only is he based out of Atlanta, we're coworkers.
It's just like you punch it, it's like, hey, this is your daily reminder that your set screw messed up my season.
I mean, we might have printed out giant set screws for Dragon Con one year and had them all over the stage.
Amazing.
In Overhaul blue.
Beautiful.
Love to see.
That's the commitment I need to a joke. Amazing. That is quite the story. Oh dearie me. Well, you made it through to the round of 16. We don't see you for a little bit. We've got a few fights to go through first. We mentioned Overhaul. They fought Beta. Beta doing Beta things and just smashing through the top, and Overhaul just stopping and grinding to a halt.
Yeah.
I forget if it was... So Beta got a hit on where the power switch for overhaul was, and I think that just busted everything right there, and it was pretty much just dead at that point.
It's like pulling a removable link, basically. It's near enough the same thing.
There are some great moments where Overhaul manages to get a good hold of Beta in this fight, but just doesn't quite manage to do anything with it every time.
Like the control was good.
Beta.
It's just Beta's hammer was just
Beta kept swinging.
It did.
The wonderful thing with an aggressive hammer is eventually you find something important.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Speaking of aggressive hammers, Chomp versus Captain Shredderator was the next fight. It kept hitting the on-off switch as well. Which
yeah, that was. So as I'd mentioned before, there were TVs set up in the pits, and the builders could all kind of sit there and watch the fights and stuff. And I recall people yelling "on, off, on, off," as Chomp would hit Captain Shredderator, and it would go in and out of signal. And if I remember what happened is that first hit dented in a piece of the shell on Shredderator, whether it was plastic or metal, I don't recall. I think it might have been part of that Lexan shield, and it basically pulled a wire loose. So one hit would jiggle the wire back into contact. The next hit would jiggle it out of contact, and the robot just kept going on and off.
Oh my god. What are the chances?
Amazing.
It's just... This season was so dumb. It was great.
There were so many weird little things like that, and I wish some of that stuff had gotten across on camera, because the story is so much better when you know the details.
Well, this is why we want to talk about it now. I feel like it's a good time to do it in between seasons. And watching this fight back, I mean, Shredderator initially showed really good control. It was kind of hanging back and not, waiting for Chomp to fall over and then hit it, which is good control. But that LiDAR system on Chomp in this season was sniping everything, wasn't it? It was so good. Precise Shot exactly came in the next fight as well, which was Hypershock and Warrior Clan. The Rakening.
Break time.
And
Have you ever seen a tactic like it? You just go out to the shops, get a rake, and it works. Kenny in this fight, Kenny Florian, was just, oh my god, it worked!
Yeah.
I've also written in my notes Hypershock driving masterclass, because the way it was just circling, like it was literally like a shark, and just
I think it's this fight that they get the best driver award for.
It was so
very
impressive.
likely.
It was so impressive.
I've only had a couple chances to drive against Will, and he's a lot of fun to fight. And yeah, I suspect he can pick up almost any robot and drive it top of the class pretty consistently.
It's a shame, because Warrior Clan was giving out some good hits of its own. It's just that, I mean, Hypershock was circling around the way it was and kept hitting that little nick at the back, didn't it? And it did look like a tuna can, as the commentators were saying.
Just peeling it and peeling it and peeling it.
Also, like, crazy too is this is like all he had, like, as far as like defense for the wheels was like this little bit that he had for one of the Shremek arms. So he had to drive like an absolute masterclass, because the entire, like, basically like 3/4 of Warrior Clan could take out one of the wheels
very easily, and he didn't let it happen. He just kept driving it. He drove it like he stole it, didn't he? Really, it was an incredible display.
It's a real shame that we didn't get this version of Hypershock in toy form, because, oh god, it's one of the best versions for sure.
I have a theory that, I've joked about it several times. It's that the more black Hypershock is, the better it does. So, Will Bales, if you're listening to this, just get some of like the blackest black paint and just spray paint a jet black Hypershock. You can find a way to make it work. I believe in you.
You can make the disc yellow, and that's it. That's all you're allowed to do.
Well, this version had like green trim, so I think fluorescent yellow trims would look really nice.
What I was telling Will he should do prior to the 2020 season is, if you remember right, Bite Force went up for sale.
Yeah.
So my suggestion to Will was to see if Paul would lend him Bite Force, repaint it to look like Hypershock, and then open the crate while BattleBots is there just to watch their reaction. What? It's done on time.
He should have swapped it, because he's obviously you could buy a Hypershock on the Hypershock merch store. Swap him a Hypershock for a Bite Force, and then call it a day. Just see what happens.
You can also buy a Bloodsport.
You can
buy an Endgame. You can buy I think you could buy a Mammoth at one point.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're all up for sale somewhere if you
Yeah.
look hard enough.
Yeah.
I will say,
I got from Matt Spurg also like an amount that you could possibly get to where he could build you a Kraken.
Things you would love to have.
I think, just reminded myself that I think Will Bales is the only person who got that Hexbug Hypershock, because we got to see it at Toy Fair and then they decided not to build it and do another Witch Doctor instead. But, you know, I think Will Bales is the only person who has it.
If Matt Spurk's got it, then you want to
Yeah,
investigate
I'm
that.
confused. But I think one of the times that he pressed the button in the 2020 season was with the rake that came off of that Hypershock toy.
Yeah.
Fun times. Maybe we'll see a Hypershock toy one day. You never know.
Please!
Jevon will give you double the money if you do it.
I will! I'll go to America myself. I just want it so much.
Well, let's talk about another toy, shall we? Let's talk about a sandpit.
Yeah.
Because Stinger versus Megatento was another one of those fights where there was a lot of backlash. Is that fair to say? I've watched the fight back today, and I don't really see the problem.
I think the big issue there is, I'm trying to remember, I think that was before Lisa had switched the disc so it was outside of the shell.
Yeah.
So in that fight, the disc was basically hidden under the shell, and it's hard to really see what it's doing.
No, the disc is out.
And
in
it's
this
hard
fight.
for Stinger, and it's really hard for Stinger to do much to Tento in general because it's meant to break big spinners, and it was a compact disc that was just gonna give kind of mid-strength hits, but keep giving them. And Stinger wins by breaking the opponent. If the opponent doesn't break, there's not a lot that can happen there.
You're right, and as well as that, I think Stinger, as you said, it's a defensive robot. Like at the end of the day, if there's nothing you can't break their fist if they're not using their fist. If they keep poking you, it's going to hurt you eventually.
Yeah.
And Stinger, for all its control, it took damage as well. It lost a wheel, so there's really no. I understand the frustration because obviously Stinger is a very cool robot. I'm a big fan, and I would love to see it fight again. And this is, I think, the last time we see it, apart from one of the rumbles in the end of the season. But Megatento had the fight won. It controlled the fight. It kept it where it needed to be. And that's the end of it, unfortunately. And
yeah, I think most of the controversy around that fight is people judging it by like RoboGames criteria, essentially. And a lot of the controversial fights, that's what it stems from, is the way people are judging the fight isn't by the actual rules that the fights are happening by.
Correct.
And that generates controversy because people will change how they fight to suit how they're being judged.
Absolutely.
I do feel for like Lisa Winter because it's like whether she's in the arena or a judge, it just seems like so much controversy seems to fall on her, and I feel for her so much on that regard.
Absolutely.
Yeah, like she got blamed for a split decision by someone, I don't recall exactly who. And it only came out after the fact that she'd voted for the one they thought should have won. But she was the one getting the blame for it because they just assumed it was Lisa, so she voted wrong.
Yep.
And that kind of crap happens way too often.
It does. Yeah. I mean, regardless, it's not just Lisa as well, it's the other two judges as well. But like, you're right in a sense that it's a shame that it's perceived a certain way that because it's Lisa, it's automatically her. When obviously, it's, as you say, it's not. It could be. She's one of three. You can't put it all on her anyway. So.
And they're all humans just working within what they're given. They're doing the best that they can. Like you can disagree with the decision. I've disagreed with decisions before, but to like go to the vitriolic levels that some people do is just
it's absurd.
Yeah, it's ludicrous.
I've just been watching this fight back, and so first thing to note is a split decision. I think that's fair because it's an incredibly close fight. What swings it is that, as you said, Sam, Stinger loses a wheel. It's caused damage, and it's when Megatento reverses their disc into it that it comes off in the end. Stinger manages to push Megatento around, but when it's trying to get the lift in, it's just turning itself over. It's not doing anything with that lift. Whereas Megatento is managing to get the sandpit over the top and move them around and do what they do best. So I think on those grounds, I can see exactly why it's a Megatento win.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Let's move on to the round of 16, shall we? And we start off with Warhead and Minotaur.
We don't have to talk about this if we don't
Oh,
want to.
poor
We don't need
Warhead.
to.
Oh.
I do a genuine question. How is the dome still in functional shape after this? Like the fact got uppercutted so
Give it a
hard,
season.
bashed across the arena.
It wasn't is the answer. It was
I thought
cracked.
It just the issue didn't get found for about a 2-year window, but the issue was there.
Yeah.
It was also probably responsible for at least 1 or 2 UFO sighting reports.
It was just the way it kind of it full gigabyte levitated, didn't it, for a second, and even
It went straight up.
Yeah, it was amazing. It was amazing, and again, a shame to see, but
I haven't seen an uppercut like that since. Well, only time I can think of one since that was earlier in 2020 when Copperhead just full on launched Gigabyte Shell up to the moon.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was impressive. It was very, very impressive, again, from Minotaur, and it does feel like a bit of a mismatch putting Minotaur against, a robot that was conceived in the early 2000s, and it's very much an art robot, Warhead, but
Yeah. The thing at this point is you're in the bracket and there's not really any kind of shuffling you can do.
no,
No.
you're right.
And it's like it was going to be Minotaur against either Warhead or Complete Control. Neither
Yeah.
of those are good fights for the robot that isn't Minotaur.
Yeah, pretty much. It's a shame, but sometimes that's just the way it goes. And Warhead, I mean, it came back the season afterwards. It was fine until the disc broke, but it was fine. Yeah, good on Minotaur. I mean, it was again a spectacular hit, and I'm glad that they did kind of ease off after they realised, okay, Warhead's just not coming back from this. So they could have caused a lot more damage to the robot, and they thankfully didn't. So yeah, not a nice way to end. Hypershock and Poison Arrow was the next fight. I've got written down here, durability wins the day, and durability of the weapon in particular, because Hypershock's disc, I think it was the first impact.
It was.
That was it.
It's a big one, and then it goes down, and then later in the fight the drive goes down, and sitting duck at that point.
I did like the see-through armor though on Hypershock in this fight.
Yeah, I think this is a lighter armor package so that they could have the big front plow.
Yeah.
It's such a shame too because they were having this fight like relatively in the bag, and it's kind of sad too. Like this is something that also goes back to 2015 when they were saying they having this Bite Force, and just seems to constantly plague the team, like even up to 2020 where they'll be in control of the fight, but because they didn't get it ended quickly enough, then it just goes.
Yep.
Yeah, so from talking to some people on the team, it's not entirely the goal, but their philosophy in general is if it goes to the judges, they've probably already lost.
So
the aim is they're constantly trying to push the limits of what their drivetrain can do to get to the driving style and behavior that Will likes. So inevitably, you're pushing all of your motors, all your batteries, all your electronics right to their limits to do that. And yeah, this season it seemed like they went just a little bit too far past the limit, and that was it.
Sometimes it happens. Credit to Poison Arrow, though they still have to keep going and keep going. They did, and good for them. They had a really solid run in this competition, didn't they?
And going from Waiachi to Hypershock, that's not an easy set of bots to beat up.
Absolutely not, and credit to them. They put on a good show in both fights. Like the monumental hit from Son of Waiachi must have done some damage to Poison Arrow as well. So to get it turned around and reliable enough to to work is very commendable. Very, very commendable. Well, the next fight, Mike, is back to you again. It was Red Devil.
This is the fight that's hitting the opposite of the judging criteria issues, where we get about 4 seconds of weapon power before it dies. I mean, it was a great first hit, but
what a
that
hit
was
it was, though.
Yeah.
The annoying thing there is what broke was a battery connector. The wire came off.
Oh.
Again, one wire.
It's always like the cheapest or the most like the smallest things that go wrong that just cause most catastrophic results.
Yeah, and I think if we'd run this weapon against Complete Control, we'd have had the same problem, and then we'd have never even been here.
Oh wow! So it could have just been
Because
one of those
if we
things.
have that one hit and the weapon's dead in our opening fight, there's no way we get a wild card. No way. So we got lucky and that happened in this fight, and once the weapon was gone, I just went, all right, I'm just going to drive as aggressively as I can for the next 3 minutes, and we'll see what happens.
It worked. You know, obviously, I think it helped that Red Devil kind of was struggling to get a hold of yourselves as well, because Bombshell was at the time quite an unusual shape to kind of, unless you complete control, like grab a hold of, and I think Red Devil's weapon didn't really suit it as well.
Well, there's two factors there. With the vertical module, we have a very triangular front profile,
Mhm.
so it's hard to get to a good spot to grab it to begin with. And then the wheel modules, the drive modules we had were on shock isolators. There we go. So each side was kind of independently sprung and floating, and that didn't mean a whole lot for ground clearance stuff, but that also meant that center pod was basically a paint scraper running around on the arena floor. So as we're driving around, you can see shavings and stuff getting pulled up from the floor and spraying off as we're driving. And that meant Red Devil couldn't get under the front of us. So all I had to do was keep that nose at them, keep driving into them, and we were consistently getting under and slamming them into things and able to really control the fight. And I still hold the only reason we got the win based on the judging criteria that season is because we prevented them from using their weapon against us.
And you'd already scored the hit yourselves.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, the way that the fight panned out, I'm sure you would have much preferred to just, you know, pull their treads off and what have you, but it's just, you know, that's just not how it works sometimes.
Yeah, I'd have very much preferred for the weapon to keep working, because then we could have had a hit like we had in the Season 3 Rumble, where you send him in the air, tread just goes flying, and it's this beautiful shot. But we didn't get what we wanted there, but it worked out in our favor in the end.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The last fight of this episode was Bronco and Razorback, and I do feel very sorry for Razorback here, because I feel like it was on top. I mean, yes, Bronco was driving it back, but the weapon of Razorback was doing enough, I think, to earn them points, only for them to get flipped on their side.
Yeah.
It was only a very awkward fight for Bronco in just a lot of ways. Maybe it's the first time we saw they were doing that whole like going backwards, kind of like using it like as almost like a front hinge in a way. But yeah, just the fact that like literally it got stranded on its side was just a big like that was the one thing that cost him. I noticed it too, like in a lot of the build ethos for a lot of teams now are to not get side stranded or, you know, get stranded on its back. Although Sam, shirt you're wearing, they had to learn that lesson a bit of the hard way in several different ways. But even like, you know, going into next season, I know the Mouse team are making that a big deal, and I think it's because of stuff like this where you can be on top of the fight and then you get stranded. You're not damaged. You weren't like, you know, beaten to oblivion. You were stranded because it was just one thing that you didn't see when designing it.
It happens.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of builders have had to deal with that at one point or another. It's kind of the nature of things. Sometimes it's we missed something in the design. Sometimes it's what we were expecting to work didn't work, and now we're stuck.
It is what it is. It's all a learning process, and I'm sure if Razorback ever did come back, it kind of angled sides so that never happened again. It's just it's
a really tough lesson to have to learn on national television.
Of course,
yeah.
Absolutely. The next episode starts off with Tombstone and Brutus.
This is a quick fight.
It was. I mean, it was one and done. Well, it wasn't one and done. It was a few hits and done, but
it was nasty.
The box rush didn't work for Brutus. By the time they got there, Tombstone was already at killing speed, and Kill It did. Yeah, and I mean, they tried Brutus, but they just couldn't get to where they need to be soon enough, could they? It was just one of those things, unfortunately. I really don't think there's much more to add to the fight other than Tombstone hit it really hard, and that was the end of Brutus.
Blue wheels.
Oh yeah, the
blue
lightweight wheels. Yeah.
The only time we saw those, I think
so.
Look.
Yeah, it's a bit weird, isn't it? Let's move on quick before we get lost in the mire of blue wheels. Nightmare and Beta. Now this fight I do want to talk about a little bit, because Nightmare throughout this whole fight, because obviously the unaired fight that they had was against Ice Wave, to qualify for this stage. And their disc is not straight at all. Like, when it's turning left, it then straightens up, but it's kind of like tilted at an angle for like the whole fight. It's amazing. I'd never noticed it before. And if you watch it back, it's definitely it's certainly slanted. You can kind of see it. And they almost had it as well. Because Beta couldn't hit them because they damaged their axe mech, didn't they? And I think irreparably damaged their axe mech, because I don't think we saw it fire against Tombstone.
I think it gotten repaired, but I'm not sure it was repaired to the point where it was fully functional or at full strength again.
Okay. So it was limping in the next fight against Tombstone. It did a significant hit on it, basically.
Yeah, this was very nearly not Beta's fight until such time as it was, basically. Yeah.
It was losing right up to the point until it won.
Yeah. It's a shame we didn't get to see the self-righting from Nightmare as well, because apparently this version of Nightmare had the wheel pods that could move, and it could run either way up.
If I recall correctly, they were having some issues with that, and at some point they decided to lock it in place, because what they were seeing was, on a really good hit, it would sort of move the wheels, and then they'd have to reset their position, and it wouldn't quite be right. So I think at some point I recall them locking the wheels in one orientation.
Okay.
I do also vaguely recall that they had the disc on a speed control instead of contactors for this season, so they were actually able to reverse the disc if needed to potentially self-right.
Yeah, you do see it in this fight. It spins downwards at some points to like kind of get some shots on the top of Beta. Like there are definitely a couple of times where it spins kind of into the floor instead of upwards.
It's a risky strategy with a robot that's sort of the shape of Nightmare, because if you're spinning downwards, you got to think that you're then going to be off balance and might
hit the floor
over
or something. Yeah, it could be anything.
It's definitely a shame, because I think Nightmare is obviously one of the most iconic robots in the entire history of BattleBots. Like, you go up to any random person and you ask them to name a BattleBot, along with Tombstone or Bronco or Biforce, people will say Nightmare. But it's also like one of those things where it's a very iconic and very catching design, but I don't think it would work in this current meta of very compact, very robust spinners. When back in the day when it first came about, vertical spinners were basically just relatively non-existent. I mean, what you had was some saw blades, but that was it.
Yeah, it's very much a design of its era. I think there are a few bots it could still do very well against. I think Nightmare versus Huge would be hilarious to watch.
Well, we saw Nightmare versus Mammoth, didn't we, as a whiteboard, and that was weird.
There was a lot going on there, wasn't there? I'd love to see it come back as a bounty hunt. That might be quite good. Like I feel like if there was ever a robot to invite back as a bounty, I mean, I'm sure BattleBots would potentially losing some money with Nightmare, but I think it would be it's a cool robot to have as a target, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
For sure.
Driving by Beta was exceptional at the end. Just to add on to that. Next fight was Yeti and Mega Tento. I've got written down Smash because that's pretty much all. I mean, Mega Tento, God bless, didn't stand the chance. The first hit, you see the chassis split open at the back, and it was kind of high centered on the one side at that point, and then the other wheel gets knocked off. So
yeah, game over.
Not a lot you can do.
Like peanut brittle.
Yeah, it was brutal from Yeti, and easy, a nice, easier fight for them at this point, because they'd had a couple of toughies, but Mega Tento didn't really offer much resistance.
But we did get to see it wear an eye patch, and that was fun.
It was, which is what you want to see.
Quick aside before we move on. There's a photo out there of I don't know if it's Lisa Winter's basement or beneath her house where she has all the
yes.
Oh, the horror scenes. Yeah.
Oh, it's terrifying. I think BattleBots shared it at one point.
It did.
Yeah.
Oh,
it is low key one of the most horrifying photos. It has those groups images with threatening auras. That photo belongs there.
Yeah. It's about 20 sandpits. You're like, oh my god, it's horrifying. They're all looking at me as well. The last fight of the round of 16 is Chomp versus Bite Force.
Hello, Bite Force. We haven't spoken about you yet.
We haven't. So, for context out there, ladies and gentlemen, Bite Force. This is the Bite Force as you know it, but not quite. So this is the first season we saw Bite Force as a vertical spinner. The first season it was a controlling, tracked lifter, grabber, wedge. It was,
which obviously it's not what they wanted to apply with, but in 2050 they wanted to apply with this, but were rejected because of the amount of verts.
I think, or it may have been time as well. To be fair, like there was
Possibly.
there was a lot going on at that point. But this is Bite Force, and this is the first time we actually see it on TV. The champion of the season previously, and this is the first time we see it on TV. No cut fights. You know, it's made its way past Ringmaster. I can't remember who its first fight was. Mohawk, that's it.
Yeah, I think Ringmaster was highlighted. Mohawk was probably highlighted as well.
Yeah. So this is the first time we see it, and it fights Chomp. Now, Chomp, at this point, has already got a reputation for sniping weapons, for sniping drive, for sniping belts. And sure enough, Chomp's, I think it was one of its first hits, I think. It's
the first hit.
Straight through the weapon chain of Bite Force, and that's the fight, because, as we said already, the primary weapon rule was so heavily favoured in this season. No matter what Bite Force did, it pretty much couldn't compete with that kind of attack from Chomp. And
yeah, I remember this being possibly up there as one of the most controversial.
Yeah, I don't think
fights.
it was quite as controversial as the Razorback Sawblaze fight, but it was pretty close.
Mm.
And, like, again, when you look at the judging criteria that was used, the decision makes sense. It doesn't feel right if you've been competing at other events where the judging criteria isn't the way it was that season. But the rules are the rules, and you've got to work with them.
What I will say is, near the end of the fight, Bite Force loses some form of drive as well, which is
commendable from Chomp to keep hitting as hard as it was.
I don't recall if it was Bite Force lost drive or if they actually got stuck on a bit of their chain.
It may well have been stuck. I have it on next to me, and they're now moving again, which would point
suggest high
stuck.
centered.
Yeah.
One of those things, isn't it, really?
It's so weird to see. Again, I feel like hindsight for this season is a really fascinating thing, because it's so weird seeing this version of Bite Force struggle when after this fight, it goes on the longest winning streak of any BattleBot competitor ever, and it's still since
this fight
season, undefeated.
Mm-hmm.
It's an amazing thing to see. You know, it again, all the credit to Chomp for getting that moment, because they are the only team currently in modern BattleBots to have beaten a robot called Bite Force, which is quite special. And I think even more amazing than that is Bite Force was originally going to be called Chompy, wasn't it? So
it was.
So it just adds to the mythos of Chomp, really, doesn't it? I suppose.
I want to move into the universe where the most dominant BattleBot of all time is called Chompy. I want to move.
I mean, Lego Wars has one named Chompy. I won't tell you how well it's done, but
good plug there. Good plug there, Javon. I'm sure David's delighted with you.
David will be proud. David will be proud.
Slip that $5 to him, yeah.
He's got to slip it to me.
Well, yeah, quite. The last episode of the season was originally meant to be 2 separate ones, but I can't remember why it was, but they moved it to 2, didn't they? There was a week...
if I'm recalling the timing correctly, it was them trying to get both episodes aired prior to the NFL's season starting,
right?
Because they didn't want to compete with that for ratings.
Yeah,
fair enough. I've actually just found out it was the day after my birthday, so there you go. How about that? Let's start off with the first fight, which is Chomp versus Yeti, and Chomp very nearly, again with the sniper, nearly got that drum belt or chain or whatever Yeti was using that season. But the aggression from Yeti just paid off, and eventually those hits and knocking off a Shremek arm, that was all.
Yeah.
Really. At that point, Chomp couldn't get, kind of pirouette itself back off its side and kind of flopped around. And
that's kind of an interesting thing to think about, though. If Chomp had gotten Yeti's chain, they'd have fought
Tombstone.
and they could very potentially have gotten that chain.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then you may have had a Bombshell versus Chomp final that season, which would have had the internet completely over themselves with rage.
I want to see that universe. You know, Charlie said you want to see the universe with Chompy. I want to see the universe with the Chomp Bombshell final. That's what I want to see.
I want to see the Chomp Bombshell final like now post 2018 as well, because I know back in 2016,
Oh yeah, of course.
before the Last Chance Rumble, the internet was like on the side of Bombshell, but it's just like,
I think
which I'm still waiting for that redemption story. I'm still waiting for the redemption. I saw that photo Craig posted. I know he can't say anything, but I'm just hoping.
We'll ask about that later. I think that could be a good way to end the podcast. What do you reckon?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll move on from Chomp and Yeti, because there wasn't really much fight after that point. It's just Chomp doing Chomp things and being stuck on its side. Bless it.
Which is why I think they then invented the piston things for 2018 that didn't really work for them. But
Well, they went back to the kind of
yeah,
the swivelly arms, didn't they? After that
but
point,
getting stuck on their side, you can see if they have one of them removed, the pistons they're inside, so they can just poke them out. It's a reasonable idea, just didn't work.
Then they decided we're gonna go a bit more simplistic. Let's make a walker.
Yeah,
can't get flipped on your side if you can't get flipped, right?
the big brain plays.
Exactly. Beta versus Tombstone. What a fight!
Yeah, that was such a fight to watch.
So close.
I still think Beta nearly had it.
Oh, definitely nearly had it.
And I think in different judging criteria, Beta had it. Like RoboGames rules, Beta had that fight. But taking out the weapon and the way it went down, yeah, makes perfect sense. But it was such a close fight. I think if the fight had to go on another 30 seconds, it might have been over too, and it might have been Beta going through.
I do wonder, like, the damage that Tombstone did at the end, where it really like messed up their hammer mechanism, especially considering how intricate and probably like very expensively machined Beta was. How easily they could have gotten that repaired, and then go on to fight Yeti.
That's the thing. Like, had Beta gone through, I don't think they would have lasted very long against Yeti, because I feel like Yeti would just get under it, and as soon as it's flipped,
Yeti wouldn't go under him. Greg would put the forks back and charge straight up into the axe mechanism with the drum.
Just full send.
And then you just see the entire hammer fly off in the distance.
Beta by this point was very tired. I think it was tired after the Nightmare fight as well. So this was just kind of further adding insult to injury, really. But a great way to bow out, and we finally got the fight we should have had in the first season, because I believe Beta in 2015 was meant to be Tombstone's first fight and not Counter Revolution. Yeah, that's why they had the Beta blocker on, didn't they? Tombstone. I want to say that's the case. I'm sure the internet will correct me if I'm wrong. The last fight, the next fight was Bombshell and Poison Arrow, and as you mentioned, you got a little bit more disc time this time, and oh boy, that last hit was chef's kiss.
Yeah, that was a really fun fight, and for us, we basically tore all the electronics in that weapon module apart, completely redid them between the Red Devil fight and then, and everything finally worked.
Yeah,
and it worked really well.
It just seemed like, as the competition went on, you just seemed to grow and grow in confidence, and the more that you like, the next opponent that you fought was always like, you seemed stronger going into it, which is not normally the case in, like, you know, these long competitions.
I mean, part of that's because we were able to finish building the robot. As I said, like, with the modular robot, you're basically building 3 robots, so, like, as far as testing anything, we did a very, very tiny amount of testing before we loaded all this up in a shipping crate and sent it to California. So we're at the event, we're testing stuff, we're fixing stuff, we're fine-tuning things, and as the event goes on, the robot seems like it's getting stronger because it is. Stuff's working better at this point.
Kind of like, maybe not to like the same extent, but like this past season with Ribot being modular, it just seemed like as the season went on, they just kept getting tougher and tougher, to where they had their upset of their own against Uppercut.
Yeah. And like, especially with a modular robot, there's so much to deal with that time is the biggest thing to help you do better.
I think that's what Victor said in the past when using the double disc, because he used the double disc against Blacksmith in 2019. And he said, I regret doing that because it was so much to get ready so quickly and I just didn't have the time for it. And I should have just gone with the single blade and just beat him instead of trying to be fancy and using both weapons. Like it was more things to go wrong.
Yeah, I will say in the Poison Arrow fight, the biggest risk I took that fight was going in for that hit when they were on the wall with the drone there.
Yes.
But I am also extremely glad I did it.
Because you got the hit later on.
Well, and it made the fight so much better. Like, that took what would have been a very short fight, because that hit was kind of early. You have that moment of the drone exploding as I slam into them in the wall, and then the fight goes on, and there's a couple more good hits before you finally get that big punt that sends them behind the screws.
Yeah.
Beautiful. I did appreciate the drone sacrifice, that they tried to fly the drone into Poison Arrow to knock it down, and it nearly worked.
When they tried that was when I made the decision to go in.
If they wanted to sacrifice the drone, then so am I.
Yeah. And I messed up exactly how I phrased it in the interview, but the philosophy I took going into all of our fights this season is I would rather lose a spectacular fight than win a boring one. In this case, the risk of losing that one didn't end up costing us.
Sure. Absolutely. The last fight of the round of 8 was Bronco and Minotaur. Poor Bronco. I mean, those extra wheels. Those extra wheels didn't help it here, did they? Because they were gone.
It was just surgery. Wheel gone. Oh no, there goes another one. Oh no, there goes another one.
I will say one thing though, like watching the fight back, there were a few times where Bronco got underneath Minotaur and the flips weren't as powerful as they normally are. Maybe Minotaur can consider themselves quite lucky that the flipper wasn't working as it should have been, I don't think, because as I said, there were a few times they got underneath and they could have quite easily launched it anywhere, because that's what Bronco does. It could have gone another way another day.
Watching that fight with how meticulous they were about taking Bronco apart, you'd think Minotaur was working for Tesco.
Wow. I work for Tesco, Mike. I'm going to have to cut that bit now. I'm leaving it in.
The part where you find out Sam's actually not a part of the two Death Flamingo team. He's part of the Minotaur team.
Yeah, I gave him all the advice.
Going to Brazil.
That's amazing.
It was such a brutal fight, and they were just so meticulous about taking a piece after piece after piece. And if the blacksmith fight was showing how powerful Minotaur is, that fight was showing how controlled they are with it.
Mm-hmm.
It was
James
spectacular.
Freytox is just like an elite driver, especially because, I mean, I've never driven a robot myself, so armchair.
You drove P1.
Like it was so like not going at top speed.
Yeah, but you still drove it. You still know what it's. You know what it's like, kinda.
Not a drum spinner, but that's like those things are so hard to control because just because of like the gyroscopic forces, they want to basically flip themselves over every time. So to drive it in such a way to where you can only prevent that, but also still be aggressive is nothing short of amazing.
And use it to your advantage, sort of thing, because he used the gyro to kind of turn quickly. It was.
Yeah, I haven't seen Daniel drive other styles of robots, but I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that he is probably in the top 5, if not top 3, drum spinner drivers in the history of the sport.
For sure.
Yeah.
It's
and at that point it's really hard to rank first versus second versus third because you've got different eras of drivers and all that, and you can't really compare people side by side. But
of course,
that style of robot, there are very few people that could even compete with him, I think.
It is quite like it's very much a synergy between him and the machine. You can see it from the look on his face when he's driving it. Like he gets
so
down to
involved.
its level. Exactly, he's very involved with
it. The best drivers aren't thinking about what they need to do with the controller. They're just directing the robot, and their thumbs kind of do whatever that's supposed to happen.
Exactly.
Well, Sam, you yourself, this past weekend came 3rd place with a drum spinner.
Yeah, and that's just good fortune.
Nah,
It was all fluke. It was all fluke.
It was not all fluke.
I'm going to claim it was, and then we'll move on from there.
Sam is a big threat in the Beetleweight scene.
I'm not. No. Just
Paint a target on him. Do
no,
it.
please don't. No, I'm a poor man. Right. Okay. Well, let's
Let's
talk.
throw what was a couch.
Let's talk about some more drum spinners, because Minotaur was also the next fight against yourself, Mike. And going into this fight, how nervous were you? Because obviously Minotaur had just blown pretty much everything away at this point.
As weird as it sounds, I wasn't. I was
really?
probably the only one on the team that wasn't. But like for me, I'm going in this. I've
Did you
driven
accept? Did you
a
think you
couple
kind of
hundred
accepted
fights
it?
at this point
Yeah.
across all the different bots, and it's like, why worry about it? It's another fight. I just need to go in, do what I do, and either I'm going to win or I'm going to have pieces. And it doesn't really matter, because at this point we've already completely blown all of our expectations for the season out of the water. We're several fights past where we thought we would be, so anything at this point's a bonus. So I'm probably the only one that's not nervous on the team at this point. Well, besides maybe Julie, my wife, who had a little 1 pound robot that was kind of Minotaur-ish, and she and I have fought each other a bunch in the 1 pound class. So she's seen me fight exactly the kind of robot I'm about to fight a bunch, and knows I know how to drive that fight.
And drive it, you did. I mean, it was
Masterclass.
Yeah. I mean, as soon as that, I did notice that first huge hit that you get on Minotaur, it flips over. The fight changes on that moment, because their wheel dies on the one side, and then after that point, it is all Bombshell. It was
Yeah, it was very
spectacular.
much this real nose-to-nose sparring match for the first minute and a half probably, where I'm trying to get the right angle on them, they're trying to get the right angle on me. They get one of our wheel guards ripped off, and I think took out a light with that, which was cool. And I'm really glad we made those wheel guards kind of break away, because otherwise they'd have potentially ripped apart a good chunk of the drivetrain if they were more securely attached. And then we finally get that angle and pop them, and that's just this really clean shot. Like, it was oddly straight as far as like the hit, the way they flip. You don't normally see a robot just go on a hit. It's usually twisting and twirling and spinning around, but it was just about as square of a shot as it could have possibly been. And I'm guessing some sort of bit of shock went through the drum, into the frame, into a gearbox, and I don't know if it sheared a pin or keyway or something. But once they were upside down and lost that bit of drive, it was a whole different match.
I mean, he tried his best to drive it on one wheel, and did do quite successfully for a good while. But I mean, I think they got high centered on something towards the end. And
So what happened is, in one of the shots where they're in the corner and we charge in, you'll see us catch either their top arm or their base plate and fold it up. So at that point, there's a bit of their armor sticking up well past the one working wheel. And then the final hit of the match flips them back over, and that wheel's held off the ground by their own armor.
unbelievable.
It seems like it's always like bad luck for Minotaur to get like high centered on a piece of something or themselves, because that's how they lost here. They got high centered on the floor in 2018, and I think something similar where they got like high centered on a bit of themselves happened when they were fighting Death Roll.
I mean, Death Roll was chewing it up quite a lot, to be fair.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
I mean, this fight, like, to me, like, it's difficult to say, because obviously, you don't want to say, okay, Bombshell had an easy one, because it didn't. Every competitor was a solid, worthy opponent, and then this is the kind of the fight where you kind of think, okay, you can't look at Bombshell now and think, okay, it's fortunate to get to where it has been, because Minotaur had been kicking everything's teeth in for the whole competition.
I guarantee you, like, almost nobody would have had us getting that far in the bracket, let alone beating Minotaur. And that seems to be, at least when I'm driving, that's the role of the robot, is we just destroy everyone's bracket and then vanish.
It is to 2016 what Tantrum's run was to the 2020 season, where it's like nobody would have had it going that far. But then it just keeps getting better and better and better, and then come to the round of 8, big upset, and you realize, holy crap, this thing is legit.
It just, you suddenly realize, oh my god, like it's happening.
We never actually found the missing tooth off our disc
Oh really?
from that fight. So when Minotaur's up on its side, kind of gyro dancing around, one of those shots is a side-on shot to our disc, and it rips the S7 tooth off and just sends it somewhere.
Vaporized it on contact or something.
But it was probably embedded in some chunk of the arena that they didn't actually dismantle until a couple days later.
Amazing. It was a spectacular fight. You know, again, like, you know, this season just continued to deliver and deliver, and I do feel sorry for Minotaur, because it would have been the final to have Minotaur versus Tombstone, wouldn't it? But I mean, we got it.
I suspect there's a few people that are very unhappy about that fight still. I know I had someone jokingly suggest I stay out of Brazil for a while.
Oh dear, it was quite something, and I think you need a big upset. I feel like for every like big competition, like, you know, look at Euro 2020 that's happening at the moment. You know, you got England in the final. Like, no one said that was going to happen. You got to have that big upset that just you kind of it makes you want to root for the underdog. Like, and this was it. Like, you know, there was no one. As I said, no one in their right mind would kind of think, okay, Minotaur has been kicking everyone's ass. He's going to lose to Bombshell here, and of course it happened, and through you went. Let's move on to more, to Yeti versus Tombstone, really. And first thing I want to say, Yeti had this fight and they blew it. So they come to contact.
Yeah, they touch the wheel.
And they touch the wheel, and I'm like,
they go boop.
I couldn't believe it. It was my head was blown when I watched this. And like, I think it's hard to say that they blew it, because okay, anything could have happened after that point. Tombstone could still operate reasonably well on one wheel, as we've seen, but the opportunity was there, and I think
Tombstone also lost weapon in this fight. Either that, or they turned it off.
The chain fell off, I think.
Yeah, or like it was slacking really hard, like where it basically was non-functional. But like, I will say this is definitely the closest Tombstone came to taking an L, and honestly, probably just like the closest to like where in a championship run, where at least in modern BattleBots, where a bot came close to losing but didn't.
I think that's pretty fair. It was tough on Yeti to kind of go out the way that it did, but the damage was done to the wheels of Yeti. Again, we've said already, the damage from the primary weapon is so key this season, and Tombstone got it and Yeti didn't, unfortunately. It had that wheel gone from Tombstone. Again, completely different fight, but
it's another fight where one thing going different or another 30 seconds could have made all the difference.
But as Charlie said earlier, going from a reserve,
an alternate,
to coming all the way up to the semi-finals and going the full 3 minutes against Tombstone, not many robots can do that.
No.
Legend status.
Absolutely, and you know, again, I think this is definitely Yeti's best season, like in terms of like, for me personally, this is the one I enjoy watching it the most. But like, it was such an amazing story as well behind it. Like, not just
it was very much a season that established Yeti as a serious competitor.
And there was definitely no way it was going to be a reserve after that, was there?
Yeah.
It's always great to like see, because I think every season of BattleBots has like these big underdog stories. Like, you know, the following season with Whiplash, where it was a robot that never had an aired fight to go to the semifinals, or in 2019 Death Roll, a robot that in this season got destroyed by Captain Shredderator, go on to bulldoze everything. And then 2020 with Tantrum, for example. Everybody loves these underdog stories, because you don't expect people to come out of left field and then, you know, go on and dominate. But I think also too, at least in hindsight of Yeti, while yes, it probably wasn't as dramatic, I think also just the knowledge of like it was in a complete unknown, and then go this far, then in the next two seasons, you know it's this big deal, so it's like it's got less room to surprise.
Sure, like you kind of expect it rather than Well,
it's tough to be the surprising newcomer or shock people when you've shown everything you have already.
Yeah.
No, I agree. It does all bring us to the final fight of the competition. It is Bombshell and Tombstone. Obviously, Mike.
That was Yeah, it
It
was
could have
so
been.
close. So the one thing that was different between the semis and the finals versus all of the other fights is the amount of time between matches. Pretty much the rest of the event, you had probably a day or more to do whatever repairs you needed. From loading out from the Minotaur fight to getting loaded up to go into the box against Tombstone, we had 3 hours. In that period, we had to rebuild our drivetrain, get our weapon set up, turn around all the batteries, and get ready to go. And we missed some stuff, some very important stuff. The biggest being during the Minotaur fight, our drive controllers got warm enough, and the shaking from that tooth being busted off was violent enough that parts of our motor controllers fell off. So we had 3 working speed controllers, and only one of them still had all of its components attached going into the final.
Oh dear.
So we found this out while we're in the test box doing final checks before going into the arena. We'd already decided we were going with the big horizontal bar, which no longer was a surprise for Tombstone, so Ray knew what was coming. We had a pretty good guess on where we needed to set it for the fight, but it's a 42-inch long bar at the end of essentially a long pivot, so we've got, plus or minus a couple inches of swing range at the tip. And what we find out is that one of our 2 front wheels isn't getting power. Luckily, our rear wheels aren't even on the ground, and one of them is. So we quickly pull the armor off, swap the wires around, make sure it's working, and load it up and go in.
Amazing. It's just send it. It's fine.
So we go into the final 3-wheel drive-ish. Not that the rear wheels mattered. So not taking anything away from Ray, because even if it was working, it wouldn't have changed a thing. It was just that moment of, oh crap, what are we going to do now?
Just panic, Was there a temptation to go with the vertical? Because obviously it'd been working so well up to this point. Was there a
So
temptation to
I'd
kind
have
of
loved to run the vert,
put the tooth?
except the tooth was gone,
Sure.
and then there were cracked welds on the wedge.
Okay, fair enough then.
So we didn't have time to repair it.
Okay, that makes sense
And
then.
if I had a brand new drivetrain and it were working, what I'd have actually done is run the lifter with our plow attachment. Because we had a giant steel plow that was 1/4-inch AR400 that was the alternate plan for Tombstone if the horizontal wasn't working right. And I think if we'd have gone in with that, with it working, we may well have won the final. But it wasn't.
I
We
mean, you
didn't.
look at how 2015 went against Bite Force using the big wedge setup, and how your fight in 2018 with the
Yep, the
Bombshell
2018 fight
designed.
was the same thickness of AR400.
Yeah,
Just goes to show.
And yeah,
I mean, obviously it's disappointing not to win it. I'm sure you would have loved to have taken home the giant. No,
I'd have loved to win. I'm more disappointed that the fight wasn't better.
yeah, it's one of those things where, of course, there's no do-overs, but it would. I'm sure it would have been nice to kind of just imagine the chain comes off Tombstone, and then Ray has to work a little bit harder. But
Well, if you look at the weapon hub on Tombstone in the next season or after the fight, you can see this notch taken out of it about an inch below the chain, and that's where we hit it.
1 inch. What could have been?
We were an inch away from disabling Tombstone's weapon on the first hit of the fight.
Amazing. Like, what could have been then? I mean, obviously Tombstone then did lay into you a little bit after that,
Yeah.
which, as you expect, because it's
Yeah.
it's
Oh yeah.
Tombstone.
I mean, it's the final. Like, once that didn't work, we kind of knew it was going to be get the trash bags.
It was spectacular. So, some of the things that were just flying off, and you just even like there's the camera focusing on Ray, and you kind of see. I think it's one of your wheel guards just fall behind him or something. It's amazing. Like some of the footage.
Oh yeah. Some parts of Bombshell just got sprayed around the arena by the time it was done.
It was quite the way to go. But I mean, second
I
place
do
is
sort
nothing
of
to be sniffed
enjoy
at.
the symmetry of that season. Bite Force lost its fight because it got, in part, when it got stuck on some chain that came out of it, and then after it won the championship. This season, Tombstone wins the championship, and then next season we beat him when he gets stuck on his own chain, just like Bite Force did in season 2.
it's amazing, isn't it? Like how it all came about again. Obviously, this is kind of the peak of Bombshell's career, really. Like 2018, you obviously had a much higher caliber of opponent with the Fight Night format and everything that went along with it as well. Is there a part of it? Is there a part of BattleBots that you obviously miss going? Because you haven't competed since 2018. That was your last season with the team.
I mean, it was a great experience. For me. I kind of did everything I set out to do on BattleBots in 2016.
Sure.
Looking back, part of me wishes I'd said no when 2018 rolled around and it was like, we don't have enough time to build the robot we want to build. So we built that Bombshell, which, yeah, it beat Tombstone, but it was kind of lackluster outside of that.
Sure.
And we had a design for a fully modular new Bombshell, but by the time we got word that the show was happening, we didn't have time to build it.
Okay.
And I really think what people think of Bombshell would have changed pretty dramatically if we'd said no and built it for season 4. And I think that would have probably been fairly different.
It's one of those really. I understand the situation because obviously, at the same time, okay, you can say we'll build it for the next season, but you never know if there's going to be a next season as well. That's another thing, right?
Yeah, that is the tough thing, and that's I think part of why we made the decision we made is, well, do we want to sit this out and potentially that's it? And we decided to go for it, and we ended up doing some things on season 3 Bombshell that, in retrospect, were bad decisions. Some of which we found out during the build, but it was too late to change it. So one of them was the 48-volt amp flows, and during the build season, one of the King of Bots events was filming, and they found out that the 48-volt amp flows were mostly good at catching fire. And this is what we built our robot around.
Yeah,
it's one of those things where, like, over the course of season 3, I think going into the Tombstone fight or into the Lockjaw fight after that, we were on 2 drive motors that were rebuilt from spare, like, burnt up parts of 3 or 4 different motors from different teams.
It was very much a Frankenbot by that point.
Yeah. And then, we decided to try going brushless for the weapon. We didn't get it dialed in. Huge credit to Junior and the Minotaur team because they helped us get the weapon spinning a lot better than it was when we got there. And, they spent a couple hours working through the MGM code and all that to try to get it dialed in, and it was a lot better than when we started. Still not great by the end, but it was definitely an improvement.
Absolutely. So, that kind of wraps up the 2016 season. What does the future hold for, obviously, yourself in terms of BattleBots, in terms of fighting robots, and I suppose Bombshell as well, really? Because obviously we've seen a few photos bounded about, Mr. Danby playing tricks with the internet, suggesting that there could be a Bombshell on the horizon. What can you tell us that you're willing to tell us at least?
So, at the personal level, I've started fighting robots again, building robots again. I haven't been fighting them yet because there haven't been many events, but I'm working on some smaller robots, including a new 30-pounder to replace Nick's. I also, for the 2020 season, actually joined up with Craig and was a remote team member handling strategy and opponent research for that event. So, when Craig would find out who he was fighting, I'd be looking at what photos they could get of Pain Train and tracking down components and figuring out exactly what made the robot tick. To the point where I tracked down the Chinese factory their wheels came from.
Send them a snotty email, that'll get them.
Yeah. So I'm still helping out with Slammo. We've been doing some build days and things like that, and I've been mostly on the strategy side, a little bit on the design side. But that's been kind of my role with the Slammo team.
Would you like to go to BattleBots again with Slammo?
I'm not sure. So the other side of it is I've also been very heavily involved in some behind-the-scenes stuff with BattleBots as an organization, with the judging criteria updates and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of in this weird spot where if things move in that direction, I may not be able to be a competitor because there's going to be a point where if I'm too involved, it's no longer ethical for me to be on a team.
Sure.
Because there could be potential accusations of bias and things like that.
Of course.
Like during this entire run up to this season, I've basically had to compartmentalize Slammo stuff and BattleBot stuff. And stuff couldn't cross that border, or else it could be construed as competitive advantage for Slammo or things like that. And it's a weird line to have to draw, but maybe I'll be out there with Slammo. I won't be there this season because I've got some other commitments, but maybe in a future season, maybe I'll be in some sort of official World with BattleBots. I don't know yet. We have had some discussions that if there's a want for it, we could potentially look at rebuilding Season 3 Bombshell in a new form and using it as a bounty bot, but that's dependent on so many other factors that are beyond our control that we're working on the plans. If we get a go-ahead, hey, cool. If not, we got plenty of other fun stuff to build.
Fantastic. I'm excited either way, and I am excited. It'd be nice to have you involved back in the sport again because, Bombshell coming back in Season 4. Okay, yes, it was good to have the Bombshell name back, but I feel like without yourself there, it was missing something, and I feel like having you involved with, even if it's with the team or if it's with BattleBots in some capacity, I think the sport is richer for it, Mike. So thank you for coming back, I suppose, if you like, and getting a bit more involved in the community and a bit more involved in the sport once again. It's good stuff.
Thanks. It's good to be back. I needed the break. I think it got broadcast on the show in Season 4 when they were kind of explaining what all happened with the team, but following the 2018 season filming, and basically right after MomoCon, which was the next event I went to, I ended up having half of my face paralyzed. And it's a condition called Bell's palsy, and it's potentially stress-induced. So I took a look at what was going on in my life, and it's like, what sources of stress exist? Maybe I should take a break from the TV show.
Yeah. No, I get that.
So took a step back, worked on a bunch of other stuff, been having a lot of fun in the shop, making weird things and silly stuff, and kind of spun back up on things, and we'll see where things go.
Good. That's good stuff. Absolutely. And thank you for joining us today. It's been really insightful to kind of pick your brains a little bit and find out a little bit more about a season, which I feel like people, look back at Season 2, I suppose, or the 2016 season and think, okay, it's a bit weird, but like there's so many cool things that happen in it, and I think that it's a lot of fun. If you haven't seen it already, if you're a new fan of BattleBots, I highly recommend going back. The 2016 season is pretty much where modern BattleBots really comes into its own and kind of takes on its own identity, I think. So
yeah, I would say that's kind of that season's sort of the break point between what I consider like reboot era BattleBots and current era BattleBots. Because there's this transition from the Discovery seasons, the ABC seasons into the Discovery seasons, where you really start seeing the nature of the sport change. And the ground game has become so much more important, and you've started seeing the meta really develop and refine itself. And it's like even things like Tombstone was the big dog on ABC both seasons. And then once you get into the Discovery seasons, everyone's kind of come up to the similar level at the top, and it's a lot harder to say, oh, this is the dominant bot outside of Byte Force, who went on an absolute tear.
No, you're right.
There were, in the ABC era, there were a couple of really big bots, and now in the Discovery era, there's probably a dozen robots, 24 robots that in a good bracket on a good day could end up taking the nut.
The playing field is a lot more even now, I would say, and I think people have just like with the advances in technology as well. Brushless has become a lot more viable as an option as opposed to back in 2015-16, where if you use brushless, okay, potential is there, but it wasn't always guaranteed to work. I mean,
you look at Bombshell in Season 2, we ran short mags everywhere. Well, except for the hammer and the horizontal spinner. Those were long mags, but it was all mag motors, so 4-pole brushed motors, stuff that's been in the sport since the Comedy Central era, essentially. And now the Vesks and all the brushless motors and things are really becoming this next evolution in the sport, it seems like.
Absolutely. Well, I think that wrapped things up very nicely. Again, Mike, thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure just picking your brains, and I think it's nice to have you on. It's just a nice person to talk to as well, which also helps.
Thanks for that. It was great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
No, it's been a pleasure. Absolutely. With that said, I have been Sam Elliott 64.
I have been World of Woodrow.
I have been and still am Charlie Hubbard.
And I've been Mike Jeffries.
And myself and Jevon will see you not too far away for our 100th podcast. We have got a guest lined up. Yeah, get your trumpets on.
Yeah.
We have got a special guest lined up. If you want to guess who it is, then feel free to comment away. But it should be quite exciting. We're excited, aren't we, Jevon?
We are very excited.
Good stuff. Anyway, see you later, folks. Enjoy.